Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this gorgeous summer evening. We are honored that you chose us over sunshine tonight. It is approximately 6 o'clock on July 26, 2018, and I'm going to call the regular assembly meeting to order in the Mona Lisa Drexler Assembly Chambers. We're going to start with usually we start with a non-sectarian invocation, but tonight I'm going to start with a moment of silence, and then we'll follow that with a Pledge of Allegiance. And for those, it's hard to find the flag sometimes, it's right back there in the back. So if you please join me for a moment of silence, rise with me. This past week, we lost a community leader, Brian Imus. Over the years, Brian was active in many parts of our community, including dog mushing, sports, labor, family events. He's missed by family, friends, coworkers, community. Please join me in a moment of silence for Brian and his family. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you again for joining us this evening. I'm going to go next to a roll call.
Are you still on?
Please. Mr. Lejeski.
Here.
Mr. Quist.
Here.
Mr. Tacky.
Here.
Mr. Cooper.
Here.
Note for the record, Ms. Major is excused. Mr. Roberts.
Here.
Mr. Gray.
Here.
Mr. Lawrence.
Here.
City of Fairbanks Rep. Mayor Matherly.
Here.
City School Board Representative Heidi Haas. Here. And Ms. Dodge. Here. You have a quorum. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for being here. So next we're going to have a safety announcement, and that's just so that if we need to leave, we all know how to do that in an orderly and safe manner. So the doors that you came in through, the double doors, of course, a good way to go out and just keep going straight out through the doors. There's also two little doors hidden behind the columns. If you take the door over here, my right, your left, and go straight out, you'll find a hallway and then turn again to the right. And there's a matching door over here behind this column. If you need to go out that door, go out to the hallway by the vending machines and turn left, and that will take you outside. Okay? We don't think we'll need to know how to do that, but should we will know how to do that. So next we have an Employee of the Month proclamation, I understand. Mr. Almost Mayor Williams. Mr. Standing Mayor Williams.
Delegates roles my borough So this is as part of working in borough administration.
Do we have a mic?
Assembly has heard this a lot, but for people who don't know this, this is something that the mayor and I really enjoy. This is something that the mayor and I really enjoy every month. We get to recognize a borough employee for outstanding work. And the interesting thing about our process is the mayor and I and the managers, we have no say so in what happens. The employees nominate this Employee of the Month, and it basically it's a bottom-up approach, which is really more meaningful. So Jennifer, come on up. Let's recognize you real quick. I'll put my glasses on so I can read this. So, ready, Jennifer? Ready. Okay. So, whereas each month, employees of the Fairbanks North Star Borough nominate a fellow employee to be recognized as Employee of the Month, and whereas Jennifer Heisemovich, admissions clerk at the animal shelter, began her employment with the Fairbanks North Star Borough in 2016, and whereas Jennifer, in her position, worked hard to create a positive and productive work environment while delivering fantastic customer service to the animal control patrons. And Jennifer has distinguished herself through her intense enthusiasm, her remarkably high level of dedication, and her exceptional communication skills. And whereas Jennifer maintains a professional, personable, and courteous demeanor while fairly and consistently teaching, practicing, and enforcing Title 22, which is our animal control rules. Whereas Jennifer is an ardent team player who is always responsive and ready to get the job done, going well above the call of duty on a regular basis. And whereas Jennifer's coworkers have expressed their deep admiration for her calm, flexible, and wholehearted approach to every goal she endeavors to complete, they count themselves very fortunate to have her on their team. Now, therefore, Carl Castle, who's the mayor of Fairbanks, North Star Borough, Alaska, by the authority vested in him, does hereby proclaim Jennifer Heisemovich, Artsy, Employee of the Month for July 2018.
Congratulations, Jennifer Heisemovich, is that correct? Or just Jennifer H. Heisemovich. Thank you so much. Congratulations. And I know that the animals also would want me to say thank you. That might be meow, bark, bark, and other things, but we appreciate your service. Very good. And Ms. Rosenberg came just to say thank you. So that takes us to our consent agenda. So is there anyone that needs or wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda or declare a possible conflict of interest on anything on the consent agenda? I see no one raising their hand. So that takes us to drumroll citizens' comments. So let me read a little bit about citizens' comments to help us all be efficient and effective here tonight. So I want to take a few moments to go over the rules and conduct of citizen comments and public hearings. There are several items on the agenda for the Assembly to hear, testimony, and consider. The Assembly is here to listen to citizens' comments on agenda items. We appreciate your comments and the participation in the process, especially on this lovely summer evening. And please, all of us, work to be respectful of everyone giving testimony, whether we agree or disagree. We like to listen quietly so that everyone feels welcome and comfortable speaking. So public testimony is heard first from citizens who signed up to speak, and then we take public comments from other members of the public desiring to speak that maybe didn't get signed up. So citizens who signed up to testify on the June 28, 2018 regular Assembly meeting for items A, B, C, and D under public hearing will be called first because we're reconvening that meeting. So members of the public have 3 minutes to testify, and this is your time to inform the Assembly about your views on agenda items, or in some cases, items not on the agenda. This is the Assembly's time to listen. During this time, the Assembly does not engage in dialogue with citizens. Citizens may ask questions of Assembly members or the Mayor during your 3-minute testimony. As a presiding officer, I may request an answer to a factual question should the question and answer be useful to the item at issue or for public understanding. Assembly members or the Mayor may ask questions of citizens giving comments after your 3 minutes are done. In an effort to help facilitate the meeting tonight, I request the Assembly to limit their questions of citizens to 2 questions. Remember, we are to refrain from using the question format to engage in discussion or make statements to persons that are testifying. Citizens are given additional time to reasonably answer all questions of Assembly members and the Mayor. So there are 2 seats available at the table. I'll call 2 names from the list to come forward. After one person completes their testimony, I'll call the next name on the list and ask you to come forward and take the empty seat. And this continues until everyone that has spoken has signed up testifies, except that by code, this part, the first part of the public testimony has to end at 6:50. So the items A and B that we signed up for, we take a pause at 6:50 by code so we can address a consent agenda, and then we have to convene our regular meeting at 7. But there are 2 times later in the meeting for us to resume that public comment. Sometimes that's surprising to many of us. So I'll ask you to state your name, I'll ask you to spell your last name, and provide your neighborhood or place of residence for the record. And then your time will begin. And if you have not finished when your 3 minutes are up, I will ask you to stop your testimony. And that's kind of our rules of the road here tonight. So we have 2 types of citizens' comments. We have citizens' comments type A, and these are comments that this is an opportunity for a citizen to speak on agenda items not scheduled for public hearing. And those include memorandums, bid awards, unfinished business, items postponed from previous meetings like the Mary Sy ordinance that we have in front of us later, reconsideration, or notice of intent to rescind. Resolutions or ordinance being advanced to a public hearing on a different date. So citizens' comments on Board of Adjustment matters not permitted. And for those of you that may have signed up for Mary Sy on citizens' comments B, really need to be on A if you're speaking to the item that Mr. The funding of the Mary Sy repairs. So we'll go through those on the list, and if we get through that list, then we'll ask those of you that may not be on the list to come up. Okay. So, and then we have citizens' comments B, which are for items that are other than those appearing on the agenda. So that's kind of anything in the world other than on our agenda. So we'll start with Ron Kovalik, and next I have Scott Calder. If you would come forward and take our empty seats. Is Ron here? So Mr. Kovalik, you're first. If you'll take a seat, give us your name, spell your last name, and tell us your neighborhood, please.
My name is Ron Kovalik. I live close to Ridgecrest.
Thank you.
Before I start
Can you
testifying,
spell your last name, please?
very hard for me to hear.
Please spell your last name.
Kovalik.
Thank you.
Okay. I need to hear from somebody here whether or not this rule is still in effect. But one of the previous mayors told me to shut up, and he told me in such a way that I would stay shut up.
Certainly, I would not do that. No.
It was what? Who?
No, that would not happen.
It happened.
Well, I mean tonight, please.
Yeah, and I'll tell you his name if you want it.
Please
But
proceed.
I attended meetings here since before 1977. I was here more than 30 years, not every meeting, but every so often. I was a volunteer road commissioner for 34 years. That means we had a lot of meetings in addition to the assembly meetings. And I don't know what ticked them off, but one day some genius bureaucrat decided every year we get a piece of paper every 3 years whenever our term was up, and it'd say, why should we pick you for road commissioner? And from the beginning, every 3 years I put on there, nobody else wants to do it. So then some genius bureaucrat says, what are your qualifications? As if doing it for 30 years doesn't count for anything. So I just put on there, I like women. Oh, that was just way too much for old twisted shorts. So that was the end of life as a road commissioner. So now we go through various housewives who have a terrible time trying to do the job. So I need permission tonight to testify about anything, because if he told me to shut up, I don't have permission to talk.
We're listening.
Huh?
We're listening, but I would ask you to be respectful of people.
Just tell me that the rule's not in effect anymore. I'm allowed to testify.
You're testifying. Please do. We're
Okay.
listening.
Over the years, I watched these borough meetings, I attended the borough meetings, and as a road commissioner, I kept seeing that the borough was becoming more and more adversarial. Our job became more difficult, more complicated, and more hard to accomplish. During the years I was doing it, in fact, even today, we have not increased our budget, and our road kept getting in better and better condition. But the people running the road commissioners, your employees, made it more and more difficult. I'd write letters. I say, I go down there and ask a question. I don't get an answer. I get someone issuing an edict, as if we're supposed to be able to deal with that. And the people that saw the letter, they said, yeah, this is totally unfair. Nobody should be subjected to this kind of frustration, restriction, and headaches. So as I watched this go on year after year, I got to the point of saying, I can't believe what the borough tells me. I can't trust what the borough says. And I watch this thing now with Mary Sy. And suddenly the thing is unsafe. And the architect gives you a report. You guys all saw the letter from the architect saying, we don't tear buildings down just because somebody said you need to tear them down. The other thing that you should all have a list of questions alongside that thing from the architect. Long list of things why Mary Sy has to go. And then we hear the story about, oh, it's a seismic issue. Well, next week, is it going to be a tsunami issue?
Thank
So
you.
it's 3 minutes.
That's because they reset it. Thank you very much, Mr. Let's see if there are any questions for you before you leave. Mr. Quist has a question for you.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony and for your decades of service. It seems your testimony was maybe about 2 different things, or maybe it was just an analogy that you lost trust in the borough, and then that segued into Mary
My
Sy.
point is completely lost faith. You know, the borough has taken on an adversarial role. Instead of helping us get our work done, they get in the way, so it's hard to do our work. And now this thing with Mary Sy, like, where'd that come from? Drop out of the sky?
Okay, so I was trying to make sure that you're trying to draw an analogy there, because I don't quite see it. So I guess my question to you is, are you surprised that after behaving in an unprofessional or in potentially disrespectful fashion, that you were, let's say, disinvited from serving on a road service commission?
Right. And the neighbors wrote letters saying, we want him to be commissioner. And no, forget it. So that means I'm not at the commission meetings anymore.
So
That's how
you were
them.
surprised. That's all I needed to know. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Roberts.
Yeah, well, a lot of us know about that bad behavior that was practiced and you were a victim of in the past. I was wondering on your testimony if you were also referring to the ordinance that's going to be in the meeting 2 weeks from now, where the borough is looking at getting rid of the fire service commissions or in general, informing one fire service commission. Were you also referring to that when you're talking about commissions?
Well, that's about the fire districts, right?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't hear anything about the road district yet.
No.
I'd have to hear what they're proposing.
Okay, I just didn't know if your testimony was also referring to that too.
No, I'm not qualified to talk about the fire district.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kowalik. Let's see if there are any other questions. Thank you for coming down. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
And I have Mike Prox next, please. Mr. Calder, welcome. Please give us your name, spell your last name, tell us your neighborhood, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Good evening, Scott Calder, Esther area, Calder. And there's, I think, 5 things here that I'll try to squeeze in. We've got the ordinance providing for tax revenue cap for amounts transferred or appropriated to the facilities maintenance reserve on consideration of calendar, 2018-22. And it doesn't have an amount. It says up to 1 mil per year. So I guess that's a guaranteed extra mil per year. But the problem I have with this is that it goes outside the tax cap. We got it, or revenue cap, whatever you want to call it. And we got that for a reason. And so I think that's not a good way to do business. The notice of intent to reconsider 2018-21, again, the tax cap. Now, like a lot of people, we all love Mary Sy. I think it's essential human services. It's very important. But again, making it contingent on the tax cap. Maintenance should be part of operations. I just think that we need to try to emphasize that somehow, that maintenance should be part of operations, and don't go outside the tax cap for essentially maintenance. Here's one. Resolution number 2018-26, a resolution opposing a policy separating immigrant children from their parents. So, I guess I don't really have a problem with that because nobody likes to separate children from their parents. But it seems a little political to me on this family reunification issue. People have been struggling for decades on this problem as a domestic issue in state courts and federal courts, the U.S. Supreme Court. People have been arguing about what it is that the government does with our kids. Our kids, not like somebody trying to come into the country. Again, no real harm in the resolution, but it just seems to me like it's awfully handy that somebody can just whip one of these things out, whenever there's a national outcry about, I guess, a sitting administration. Then we've got, again, let's see, 21A, the gift to the animal shelter. And it seems to me like you ought to put that into maintenance. And then this locker room and roof replacement, again, maintenance as operations. So that's kind of like my short version on those 5 items in 3 minutes.
You did an amazing job. Let's see if there's questions. Mr. Roberts has a question for you.
Yeah, did you know that 1 mil is worth approximately $8.5 million currently? Give or take half million.
Well, yeah, and every year it would be worth millions more if you did it every year. Yeah, so,
Okay, so-
bad.
Mr. Quist had a question?
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Given that the tax cap, revenue cap, was put in place and is maintained in place by the same mechanism that these other funding mechanisms are proposing, namely at the ballot, does that in any way help your concern about it going around the tax cap if it's the same, it's the voters that are making the decision to do that?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
I could try to rephrase it. I'm sorry, that might have been poor. So,
Trying the parts that I do understand, but maybe if you could just...
yeah, so the tax cap is put in place by the voters.
True.
If these proposals about bringing in extra money for maintenance would also be approved by voters.
Okay.
Given that it's the same mechanism.
Right, and the theory would be, I think I take your point now. The theory would be there that, well, if the voters get to decide, then it's okay. But I think that it is misleading, and it sort of obfuscates the main point of the tax cap and limited government and so on, to put maintenance on the ballot. It seems to me that, again, that maintenance should be part of operations. And we've got like millions of dollars being spent on transfer sites to make it harder to recycle, and the traffic's improved. I'll grant you that. It's probably safer.
So, Mr. Calder, since we have a full group, I'm going to see if Mr. Quist's question has been answered.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other
Okay,
questions,
it
Mr.?
wasn't all of my answer, but...
Seemed like you've gotten most of the gist of it.
Well, could I maybe finish a sentence on that?
Yes.
Thank you. Point being that while we have a lot of what I would consider to be exorbitant and irresponsible and even egregious things that are costing a lot of money, then putting maintenance on the ballot, like, oh no, what do we do? At least it seems disingenuous to me, and I just, aesthetically, if nothing else aesthetically, I just don't think it's a good way to do business.
Thank you, Mr. Calder.
So thank you for your indulgence, Madam
Anything
Chair.
else? Thank you, Mr. Calder. We appreciate you coming down and whipping through those 5 items that quickly. Next, I have Phyllis Alexander, I believe, perhaps Phyllis Tugman Alexander. Mr. Prox, welcome. Please give us your
Thank you,
name.
Madam Chairman. My name is Mike Prox. That's with a P, as in Pete Armigan.
Right.
R-A-X. And I live at 1015 Meadow Room, North Pole. And I'm coming down right now. I want to speak about Ordinance 2018-24, which apparently is on the agenda to be advanced to public hearing. And to be honest, I don't think you should even advance it to a public hearing. The ordinance has to do with, it isn't as egregious as I thought, but it's one more step down the road to combining fire service areas, which is always in the interest of people that are working for fire service areas, but not necessarily the people in the service areas. And you mentioned in their whole long list of whereases and all that might be so, but I worked as a volunteer for a while for the North Star service area. And the even back then, and this is quite a few years ago, the majority of calls were for ambulance services. And the majority of those calls appeared to me to have to do with drugs and alcohol and people just being stupid. And certainly didn't have anything to do with fire, but the fire department would roll out a fire truck and a chief truck, and everybody else would respond to an accident on the road. And it was way beyond the scope of what I thought was authorized by the Citizens for Fire Service Area. And now a lot of this is based on the contracting with the borough for emergency services, which really I object to. And I think the Assembly, rather than trying to encourage more building of these fire departments, the Assembly should ask whether the citizens in those fire service areas should be taxed to provide services that deal with ambulances, in addition to what we're paying through taxes for the borough-wide ambulance service. So I really would just assume that you not even put this up for discussion. I don't think we've had a good enough discussion on whether or not the fire service departments are staying within the scope of their existing authority. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Prox. Let's see if there are questions for you. Yes, Mr. Quist has a question.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out tonight. So you're aware that the borough currently operates emergency services on an area-wide basis?
Yep. Emergency meaning what?
So if you're outside a fire service area and you call 911 and you want an ambulance, that ambulance will still come to you?
Correct. And they're contracting with my objection, I guess, is that they're contracting with the fire service areas to do that. And it is resulting in scope creep. And it is way more service than I want to force my neighbors to pay for.
Well, thank you. I think I understand your point much better now. Thank you.
Mr. Roberts.
I just want to make a correction for the public that it's funded out of the ambulances are funded out of the non-area-wide fund, which does not include the cities.
Well, I'll buy that.
Thank you.
Who's me? And my neighbors.
I had a question for you, Mr. Prox. If you were going to refer that ordinance to some group for consideration, would you refer it to the fire commissions? Would you refer it to a working group? Or what would you would just...
We elect assembly members to take care of stuff like that. The business of the assembly really should be to govern the service providers. You should be managing and you should be making sure that they're not exceeding their authority.
So you wouldn't refer it for conversation and clarity. You would kill it.
I would kill it.
Thank you. Any other questions from Mr. Prox? Seeing none, thank you for coming down. We appreciate it. So next up, I have Ms. Arlene Slocum. Thank you. And Ms. Tugman Alexander, please give us your name, spell your last name, and tell us your neighborhood. You have 3 minutes.
Phyllis Tugman Alexander, Tugman-Alexander.
Thank you.
I live off of Henderson Road. So I'm not sure I even signed up in the right place because, out there waving signs in 80-degree heat.
You're in the right place.
And so basically I've been following the Mary Sy issue from afar. I started at Mary Sy probably 35 years ago when I was pregnant with my first child, and aquasize was something that you could do, with basketballs in your stomach. And throughout my livelihood here and 40 years in the borough, I've used either Mary Sy when I've been convalescing from surgeries from knees and shoulders as I age, or lap swimming at Hammy, just because it's a good thing to do. And I always felt like we were very fortunate to have the number of pools that we do in the borough. I know when our kids were on swim teams, there were quite a few communities who couldn't afford a pool. And I felt like that is a good, clean, literally, activity for anybody to participate in, particularly if you find yourself aging and with that incurring injuries. So I just kind of, while I was watching this issue and feeling saddened by the fact that Mary Sy may no longer be in existence for a plethora of reasons, my concern has been, why knock it down until you have something else in place? I understand the seismic study won't be completed till December. So my testimony is simply this: as a person who raised children in this area, now grandchildren, that we use all the borough pools, we feel like it's a real strength in our community. It's a healthy activity. It's a rewarding family fun activity, and you can't have too many pools. And I would just hope that the assembly would look at either building the larger, more complex scenario with a pool, but don't take down Mary Sy until that's completed, simply because there's a lot of folks that can only use Mary Sy for a number of reasons, most being limited physical abilities. So it's somewhere that I'm very fond of going, and hope that the measures as they are brought forward take into consideration. There's probably a lot of people in this community like me that maybe don't feel comfortable coming down and testifying about convalescing in a pool, but there's a lot of us out there, and we're kind of loud. Bit vociferous. We've been waving signs in 80-degree heat, so I hope you'll take that into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tugman Alexander. Let's see if there are questions for you. Oh, thank you very much. Oops, Mr. Quist has his hand up.
Thanks for coming out. So just wanted to make sure you're aware that we've secured funding, this Assembly secured funding for Mary Sy for FY19, and that on tonight's agenda, we're in no way considering closing Mary Sy.
I understand that. I think that concern has been, if you build the kind of structure that folks are talking about, that may take longer than 2019. And in the interim, the same argument is going to take place. Don't destroy it until there's something up and running.
Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you.
I think. Thank you. Thank you.
So I have Ron Arnold next.
Oh, you may strike my name.
Okay, Mr. Arnold. And then I have Liz Gregg, perhaps Gregg. Thank you. Ms. Slocum, welcome. Please give us your name, spell your last name. No musical instrument tonight?
No, if you want to hear me play, you'll have to come down to the Golden Eagle Saloon in Esther on Sunday nights. I'll be happy to sing for you then.
Thank you. So please give us your name, spell your last name, give us your neighborhood.
My name is Arlene Slocum, S-L-O-C-U-M, and I live in the Pearl Creek neighborhood. Am I ready to start? Thank you for the opportunity to testify again about the importance of Mary Sy Recreation Center. I'm going to hold up my sign. You get to see it. It says Mary Sy Rec Center equals hope. Hope for the patrons of Mary Sy is on shaky ground, in part due to unknowns about funding for the future of the building. As of this time, there will be no new facility built with bond money. The maintenance money from this past budget was allocated to a seismic study and is now unavailable. No plans are on the table to make needed repairs until the seismic study is released, and that may not occur till December. The ordinance you're going to discuss tonight, if passed, will take months to be in effect. I ask, does anyone care, or are they going to delay this, hoping we all get tired of it and go away? Well, we aren't going away. Come down in the morning and see the pool filled with water walkers and aerobics classes. Spend a couple of hours using the facility, and you'll see a diverse cross-section of Fairbanks getting fit, hanging out with family and friends, and having fun. I say, God bless Mary Sy and the gift she gave to our community that is worth more than any dollar amount. You cannot put a price on your quality of life. There simply is no equivalent for what Mary Sy Rec Center has to offer in our community. Losing Mary Sy Rec Center would break the hearts of many in the Golden Heart City. One day in the future, if you're lucky, you'll get to be me. Right now, you're raising families, working with little extra time for yourself. Your future, if you are not taken early from illness or accident, will be one of stiffness, joint replacement, back problems, and loss of cognitive function. You won't be able to tool around on a jet ski on Tanana Lakes. You won't be able to ski full tilt on the trails at Birch Hill. You won't be racing your sled on that trail to Chena Hot Springs. You will be grateful to get out of bed each morning, thanking the good Lord that you have another day over the hill instead of under it. And then you'll want to go join your friends at the Mary Sy Rec Center. Thank you for your time.
I figured you had a performance for us, just absent your instrument. Thank you very much. So does anyone have questions for Ms. Slocum? Seeing none, thank you very much. We appreciate you coming down.
Thank you.
So I'm going to take a bit of a liberty here. I think that there are many that signed up on the wrong sheet, as indicated by Mary Sy. So I'm going to finish this list and then call the Mary Sy from that list if hopefully not too upset with it. It's a little bit off, but I think it's the intent of the group. So Ms. Gregg, is that correct? If Marlise Powers is next?
Only Mary Sy is going to be here.
I'm going to go through those things on this list that are under, that would be under this list normally, that are signed up. Are you on this list or? Oh, okay. So that would be my plan. There'll be another opportunity later. Ms. Gregg.
Liz Gregg, G-R-E-I-G, Hamilton Acres. I'm here to ask the Borough Assembly to please pay closer attention to the goings-on of IGU. I've been attending meetings there for the board meetings, work sessions, and most recently I've added the Finance Committee meetings for the last year and a half. So I have a fairly good understanding of what's going on. Recently, there was a scheduled Siemens charrette between Siemens and IGU, and it was canceled a week before the charrette was due to take place. However, Siemens did make two community presentations here in Fairbanks. And the reason that I'm discussing this is because we have a time limit for next Christmas, next December, 2019, to lower the PM 2.5. And we're at risk of being severely dinged by the EPA if we do not. And I do not see the IGU moving in a timely fashion in order to make that happen. For instance, there was a meeting at one point where the job of the proposed conversions manager was stated to be of prime importance. I don't see that person having been hired yet. Siemens is in a position they're a worldwide, world-class corporation with the highest level of technology, and they have the ability to get the funding to build the infrastructure needed in order for this community to meet our deadline. I would ask the Borough Assembly to please keep a closer eye on what's going on, to seriously consider what Siemens has to offer this community, and to exhort, perhaps, IGU to move. If they have to drink prune juice, so be it. But move, make a move. And they're not doing it. They're foot dragging and obstructing certain individuals. So since the borough purchased IGU, since they purchased FNG and Pentex, we own it now. And I think it behoves you to keep a closer eye on what's going on over there. I'd appreciate it if you would do that.
Thank you, Ms. Gregg. Yes, Mr. Roberts.
So I just wanted to know if you knew that there are two positions for the IGU up for election that nobody has applied for yet.
I can't afford to do that work, or I might consider it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Quist.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Roberts asked one of my questions there. Thank you. I wasn't able to attend that charrette, but I did get as much information as I could after the fact, and it seems like there isn't really a lot of data coming from Siemens on the deal, and I'm just curious, I mean, when we or IGU can get more specifics, and I'm not under the impression there's anybody on IGU staff that's doing this research or diligence for that deal, and that we're somehow depending on Siemens. I mean, is this accurate, and is there more information coming from Siemens at some point?
I would strongly suggest that you speak to IGU personnel and the board and get that information for yourself. It's a little bit too complicated for me to go into here. It's a very complicated project, but...
Do you have a question?
Yeah, maybe I'm not asking my question very well, so maybe I'll just catch up with you later.
Okay.
Then, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. Next I have Carl Weed. It's Carl. Mr. Weed, if you signed up for Mary Sy?
Oh, other things are going to be brought up.
Oh, okay, thank you. Joanne Sexton, were you wanting to speak on Mary Sy? Thank you. Ms. Powers, please give us your name, spell your last name, and tell us where your residence is. Your neighborhood.
Marlis Powers, P-O-W-E-R-S, Sliderville. And I have a little letter here if you don't mind me reading it here. I, Marlis Powers, have been a foster parent, tribal and state licensed for 14 years. I recently attended a class and educated myself about the children and adults with autism. Throughout the class, there was one fact that caught my attention. 95% of autism-related drownings are caused because they are attracted to water. That is why I'm here for this meeting today. I believe it is very important for Fairbanks as a community to have a place where all the children and adults with mental illness can be safe in all Alaskans. I have seen firsthand that kids from the village do not know how to swim because they can't swim in the Bering Sea or the Yukon River. That's why when they come to Fairbanks, they need a safe place to learn how to swim. Please build another pool before the destruction of any in the community. Thank you for taking your time to listen. Marlis Powers.
Thank you. Let's see if there are any questions for you, Ms. Powers. Seeing none, thank you for coming down. We appreciate it. So next I have Mickey Rosser. Ms. Sexton, please give us your name, spell your last name, and tell us your neighborhood.
Joanne Sexton, S-E-X-T-O-N, and I reside at Monroe Street here in town.
Please proceed.
I am addressing Mary Sy and the ordinance that for reconsideration. We've been here many times with you and appreciate your efforts. And when it was voted upon, we assumed that it was a finished deal. So in the paper it said Mary Sy saved. And then the very next day, it had up for reconsideration. I believe it was Mr. Cooper that brought it forward for reconsideration. In the interim, we had money allotted for maintenance that was earmarked until the seismic test was back. So I've just kind of done some research, and I mean, the borough hired Beddesworth Company, and they inspected 6 buildings for $299,953.16. Then they contacted the Beddesworth to do the Mary Sy facility only. That contract was $187,235, of which $16,914.58 has been paid for that study, which leaves a balance of the remaining funds. And the Beddesworth Company did their structural thing, and then another contract was awarded to Nortec, and they had a contract for $83,155. Thus paid is $14,223.90. So there's a balance for Nortec. These monies are spent now. They're allocated to go to these companies under contract. So there's a balance at Nortec for $68,931.10. Now, Beddesworth has PDC for doing the seismic study, and we were told that perhaps we would, the test was done in June, and I don't know the amount of money for that because Beddesworth has the contract with PDC. And I guess what I'm addressing here is all the monies that have gone out, all the monies that are still under contract, and we're talking about maintenance and operation for Mary Sy. And none of our intent was ever to be on a ballot pinning ourselves against a tax cap. When we pay our property taxes, this is a borough facility, and we just assumed it would be in the budget, allocated funds for maintenance and operation, and would continue until some other plan came up for replacing the pool, both pools, Hammy and Mary Sy. So it just seems like such a waste of money. And the only report I've read is a structural index at 0.70 is extensive structural damage, and we were 0.45. Therefore, it doesn't warrant demolition. And I'm just curious. Just curious.
Thank you, Ms. Sexton. Does anyone have questions for Ms. Sexton? Trying to think if there's a technical answer you might make about the expenditure of the report.
Well, I haven't seen it. My suspicion is this is related to the records request that was filed late last week, which we replied to early this week. There's probably some reports of purchase orders related to those contracts.
I do have the purchase orders.
So that work hasn't been completed yet, and that work was commissioned to do the seismic studies and get the extra information that we needed to decide about whether or not, how much it's going to take to fix that building. So there's a lot of work left to be done. We should probably see the answers to that in December. That's the plan right now.
My question is, why is it taking so long? I mean, if you contract a job, you either have expectations of when it will be finished. Another thing, the funds that were allocated for maintenance is in the 2018 budget. After December, those funds will not be warranted to Mary Sy, and you'll start budgeting for 2019. So those monies won't be used for Mary Sy.
So I don't know. We don't debate here. I don't know that answer. I just wanted Mr. Williams to let you know what he might know about the report.
Yeah, I was just curious about that because I think those monies are gone after December.
Yes, Mr. Roberts.
Technical question
Thank
of
you.
the mayor's
Yes, thank you.
chief of staff.
Yes, please.
Are you
Please, yes.
Okay. So the question I have, the testimony here has got me wondering, did we start on any of the maintenance that we were going to do this summer? We were going to do some testing on seismic and stuff, but I thought we were going to start on a chunk of the maintenance. Has that been completely, has the decision been made not to do any of the maintenance this summer? Even the stuff we already knew what needed to be done?
I can't answer that specifically. At my building design construction engineer sitting in the back of the room over there, and I think we can pick his brain on a break and get that answer and get that information.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And one other question, technical, the monies that are being spoken of, do those actually lapse December 31 or not?
No, those should be good for this fiscal year. They should be good through June 30th of next year.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Sexton. We appreciate you asking.
I thank you for your time.
Questions. So Ms. Rosser is going to be our last person to testify because we have to, technically we should, let me restate that. There are 2 more times for citizens' comments this evening, but for now we have to put this citizens' comments on pause so that we can convene our normal meeting. So Ms. Rosser, please give us your name and address or your neighborhood, and you'll have 3 minutes.
My name is Mickey Rosser, R-O-S-S-E-R. I live on Denali Way in the downtown area. I'm here just tonight again to testify, sort of on the seismic study on the last meeting that I testified at. I still have a hard time wrapping my mind around it taking 6 months for this to happen. Especially since the mayor was quoted in the paper saying that the report would be out in December. I attend another borough meeting, and I hear the report will be due in September. I was wondering if someone might be able to enlighten me which date is true. It's frustrating as our group is trying to come up with some solutions, possibly community involved, and we're just as anxious to get this information so we can move forward and go out into the community to try to do what we are going to try to do. And so, I don't know, sometimes it appears this seismic report is becoming a political thing for maybe to sway the vote. And it's just not my feeling. It's just people, I talk to a lot of people. I stand on the street corner. People come and talk to us. And it's frustrating for us to try to move ahead when we don't have the answers. And then when you go to different borough meetings, you get different times the report's going to be out. And that's all I have to say on that issue. And as far as the 2 ordinances, I know I spoke and I was in favor of 21, but we're having a hard time. There's people that want to say Mary Sy, but then we get into the tax cap thing. So they don't want to vote against that. So now Mary Sy, the Friends of Mary Sy, are becoming enemies of the community. And this is not where we wanted to be. That's what's not our intention. And now it feels like we're back to square one again. And we're going to be right back here next year if the 22 passes and there is maintenance money. Now it's not just going to be Mary Sy, it's going to be among the people, and we're all going to be back here all trying to get your money. So I thank you for your hard work. I mean, and all the time that you've spent listening to us and trying to help us, but it just, I don't know, it just is seeming very frustrating. But we're not quitting. We're not quitting. We'll be back. Okay, you can have my exit in 19 seconds.
Thank you, Ms. Rosser. Let's see, yes, Mr. Gray.
I was just going to ask the
For technical?
administration
Yeah,
if maybe
thank
you could clarify the timeline issue that might clear the air
I
on some
agree.
of this.
Right, so we got direction from the Assembly on a different path back in April, May during the budget hearings, and we took that to heart, and we began the process of commissioning the study work to get that done. And our initial estimate was that it would be around August. Well, they've torn into the walls and got them from the data, the hard data they need. It's going to be probably December before they actually finish the hard report. So we underestimated the timelines, and we're frustrated too.
Thank
want
you.
the answers.
I
We
know I
appreciate
can't
that.
say anything.
Nope, you can't. And we're past our time. So any other questions for Ms. Rosser? Thank you, Ms. Rosser. We appreciate that. So that's going to take us to approval of agenda and consent agenda. Approval of the consent agenda passes all routine items indicated by an asterisk on the agenda. Consent agenda items are not considered separately unless an assembly member so requests. Does anyone need to declare a possible conflict of interest for items on the consent agenda? See no one indicating that they do. Are there any other items to be removed from the consent agenda before it's read? I see no one raising their hand. Clerk, would you please read the consent agenda?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Approval of the minutes, regular Assembly meeting minutes of June 14th, 2018, regular Assembly meeting minutes of June 28th, 2018. Communications to the Assembly, memorandum from Mayor Castle recommending the appointment of various road service area commissioners. Memorandum from Mayor Castle recommending the reappointment of Calvin Lee to the Fairbanks Diversity Council. Memorandum from Mayor Castle recommending the appointment of Harold B. Wilmer and Michael R. Kwasinski to the Plating Board. Consideration of the calendar, new business, ordinances to be introduced in advance to public hearing. Ordinance number 2018-24, an ordinance amending the Fairbanks North Starborough Code Title 4 and Fairbanks North Starborough Code Title 14 to eliminate fire service area commissions and establish a new fire and emergency medical services advisory commission. Sponsor Mayor Castle. Referred to the committee of whole on August 2nd, 2018. Advanced to August 9th, 2018 for public hearing. Ordinance number 2018-21A, an ordinance amending the fiscal year 2018-19 budget by accepting a designated gift and appropriating $110,000 to the special revenue and/or capital project funds for the Fairbanks North Starborough Animal Shelter. Sponsor Mayor Castle. Referred to the Finance Committee on August 2nd, 2018. Advanced to August 9th, 2018 for public hearing. Ordinance number 2018-21B, an ordinance amending the fiscal year 2018-19 budget by appropriating $546,363 from the school district's facilities maintenance reserve to the capital projects fund for Lathrop High School gym and a locker room roof replacement. Sponsor Mayor Castle. Referred to the Finance Committee on August 2nd, 2018. Advanced to August 9th, 2018 for public hearing. Ordinance number 2018-21C, an ordinance amending the fiscal year 2018-19 budget by appropriating $37,000 from the general fund balance to the capital projects fund for the purchase of 2 indoor video boards for the Big Dipper Ice Arena. Sponsor Mayor Castle. Refer to the Finance Committee on August 2nd, 2018. Advanced to August 9th, 2018 for public hearing. And that concludes your consent agenda.
Thank you. Look for a motion to approve the agenda.
Move to approve the agenda and consent agenda?
Second.
So moved by Mr. Gray, second by Mr. Tackey. Any discussion, debate? Any objection to approving the consent agenda as read? Seeing none, it's approved. We're going to take a very brief recess. We'll be back shortly around 7. Thank you, everybody. We appreciate a short break. And so we are reconvening this meeting, and we're now moved into reports from representatives. And we have 3 esteemed representatives, and we'll start with a report from the City of Fairbanks. Let's see. Yeah, no, I just wondered if we need to do another safety report. Mayor Matherly, do you have a report for us this evening? Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Borough Assembly. It's nice to be here tonight. And thank you for those folks who joined us in the Assembly chambers. Biggest news this week was our firefighter contract. You probably followed that and tracked that. We went through our negotiations, and it was finally looked at by the council on Monday, defeated 4-2. So I go back to the drawing board with the fire department, assuming that's what they will do. We passed our first cannabis bakery in the city limits on Monday night. Miss Audrey Ranstead, who owns Brugger's Bagels, brought forth her idea, and it was passed by the city council. Some of the things we're working on within the city limits are some more problem properties. I kind of talked about that a year ago. Public Works Department went over to the old dairy, which is down off 2nd Avenue, and we took out 12 truckloads of materials from all around that structure, which is primarily just 4 walls at this point. And we're going to put a lien on that property, and now we're going to write a letter to the owner. If he does not tear it down, we will tear it down. That's been in my purview now for the last couple of months. I'm also leaning on a couple of other properties too. I'm happy and I'm sad to report that we now own the Polaris building. It's a mixed bag for me. I'm just glad to get Mark Marlowe cut out of the middle on this whole thing, and I want to thank the Borough Assembly for some of the help they gave us when it came for this. It's a huge eyesore. Everyone listening, everybody in this room, no, this is not coming down in the next year or two. You're going to have to bear with us on that as much as you can. We just don't have a $5 or $6 million checkbook to tear it down. But there are some good things happening around the Polaris. We are going to give it more attention when it comes to securing it now. Mr. Marlowe just simply wasn't doing that. He hasn't paid attention to it in over a decade, as you know. I wish we could knock it down tomorrow. And if I could have the power to do it, I would do that. It's our biggest eyesore in downtown Fairbanks. So again, that's why I say I'm both happy and sad that we own it. I wish the borough had kept it, but they didn't. So I don't know what we're going to do with it at this point. There's a lot of folks have a lot of ideas, but for now it's there. So far, I just want to brief people on if you want to file for public office. Mr. Bagwell, who I appointed when Jerry Norm resigned, he has to run this year. That's what you do when you appoint. They just serve until the next year. He has one challenger. Joy Huntington is not running for her seat again. She made that publicly known. We have one person running for that seat unopposed, and then Miss Rogers, June Rogers, is up this year. She is running unopposed so far. So I want to encourage more people to jump in. July 30th is the deadline next week. And if they don't, it'll be a pretty easy race for one person, pretty easy for one incumbent, and then one incumbent's going to have one challenger. If you want to know more about the city, you're welcome to come by and talk to me at City Hall. I'll be more than happy to tell you some of the challenges we're facing within the city limits. And also want to say thank you to all the really nice comments we got about the police lip sync challenge video. I do want to publicly say I did have a few people upset, taxpayer money, but I'm telling you right now, you can't buy good morale. And on a whole, police work in this country has suffered a little bit the last couple of years with a whole lot of negativity, in my personal opinion. So one of our police officers' daughters filmed it. She did all the editing. I mean, we didn't spend a lot of money on the thing. Even my scream, I did on my own time that I did a cameo in. And I thought actually it was money well spent just for the morale boost the police needed. That's just my opinion, folks. I think it was fine. I think we all need to smile once in a while and have a little fun. And that's what we did at FPD. And I want to put my hats off to them and all the nice comments we got. 500,000 views and 4,000 real nice comments. So thank you for all that the Assembly does. It's not easy doing what we do, but we do it because we love it and want to make a difference. Congratulations also, Mr. Quist jumped in for Borough Mayor. I see Mr. Shields was in the room as well. And I think it's going to be an interesting race coming up this fall because Catherine Dodge is also doing her race. So everyone who's running, hats off to everybody who jumps in the ring. It's not easy, but it's very, very rewarding when it works. Don't you think? That's why we do it. Thank you very much, folks.
Thank you, Mr. Mann.
You're welcome.
And that takes, let's see, are there any questions from Mr. Mann?
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Roberts, sorry.
So on the dairy that you're talking about, which I actually can't picture that building in my head, but is that going to be tax foreclosed like the Polaris, or are you doing a condemnation action because of structural deficiencies? What's the angle?
Well, here's the interesting thing. Technically, we can't even tear it down because the walls are sound, right? It's a weird deal. I was talking to the building department today. The walls are perfectly sound. He tore it down just enough to keep it up. It's kind of like Frank Gold did to his building on Airport Way. He did just enough work to get less taxes, but never really finish the place. You get a lot of people that do that. You know, they do just enough to get their thing done. But what we did condemn it, and we did tear everything out of it so people wouldn't really be in there messing around it. It's completely empty at this point. So now what we're going to do is we're going to ask him to tear it down. If he does it, we will demand it. If he doesn't go down that, then we will tear it down as a nuisance property, and we will send him the bill.
So if the walls were good, what did you condemn it on?
Let me check and see if it was actually condemned, Lance. It may not have been actually condemned. I know we did that with the Polaris. I might be getting that mixed up.
I'm concerned with the process, not just for him, but as you mentioned, other property owners. And are people going to have to be worried about what the city considers to be a building they like or don't like? I mean, what is the line? We really the city,
you don't have to
represent people in the city.
Yeah, don't go that deep with me, Lance. This is a problem property. I'm not going to do it to properties that are functional. Please understand that. You don't have to go down that road. I'm not going to go knocking on doors saying improve your house or we're going to tear it down. This is an abandoned structure with a whole lot of problems that he has never paid attention to. Frank Turney's been very vocal about that dairy. Drugs have been done in that place. There's been all sorts of crime around that building. It's on 2nd Avenue. Go take a look. You'll know what I mean.
So is it like about the 100 block?
Yes, exactly right.
Okay, so the other question I was going to ask, are you going to make sure, now that you own the Polaris, that political ads don't get put on it this year?
You know,
the realtor was illegally putting signs on it.
You're not going to see that.
Thank you.
No.
Okay, any other questions for the mayor? Seeing none, thank you, Mayor. Ms. Welch, welcome.
Thank you.
Would you like to give us a report from the city of North Pole?
Sure. Greetings from the mayor. He sends a little note with me here saying that he has now finally finished and sent in to the people who need to look at it, the military facility zone paperwork, and it turned out to ended up being about 130 pages of all the good stuff and whatever we can offer in North Pole. For that, we expect an answer back, but we don't expect any problems within about 90 days or so. We should be granted that designation as a military facility zone. That, of course, leads us to the fact that we're working with all our legislators, specifically Senator Parkhill at this point, and working with him to get some better tools in our box so that we can use that facility zone to something really good down there, which means like trying to find some tax incentives and other ways of financing stuff in that zone. And it will actually be the whole city of North Pole that will be. He also told me, by the way, that though he was kind of crying when he said that they had on the 4th of July, they had the yearly Eielson North Pole baseball game, and North Pole got a whooping this year apparently, so I wasn't able to watch that. Also, we still have a couple of more seats. Actually, we have 3 seats that are open for the city council in North Pole. So I think it's Friday is the last day to put in your application for that. So if you're interested in serving the city of North Pole and you're from North Pole, please come out and help us out with that. I think we only have 1 candidate for 3 seats. It's going to be a split personality after that, I think. Other than that, like the newspaper said, we are running strong right now. Almost $16 million worth of construction projects are either in process and or in permitted in various stages. So we're pretty happy about that. Our water project for the Sulphur Lane mitigation is running on schedule at this point. 1 and 2 sections are doing great. The pump house that is going to be over there, our new pump house that's going to facilitate all these new customers, will be dedicated in October, and it will be dedicated to Buzz Otis. It will be his pump house in memory of Buzz Otis and all that he has done for our city. But I think that's about it.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Welch. Let's see if there are questions for you. Seeing none? Oops, was your hand up there, Mr. Roberts? Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate you driving all the way in and visiting with us and briefing us. So next we have Ms. Haas with the school board. Welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Dodge, members of the Assembly. We finished up another school year, wrapped up June 30th, of course 6 weeks after our students have left, but still the work continues, and we were able to move forward on several strategic plan initiatives. Our strategic plan has been really critical in continuing to meet the needs of our district, as well as not getting hung up when we are faced with different challenges. If we have a clear path, much like we do in our own lives, we're often able to continue to forge forward. So we were able to implement the K-8 school models at 3 schools that wanted to implement that, and that was Ladd and Joy and Arctic Light. We also were able to we were phasing in full-day kindergarten throughout the district in a 3-year phase, and we were able to actually go ahead and just finish that out. And so next year, full-day kindergarten will be offered at all of our schools. I think we might have been the last district in the state that wasn't offering full-day kindergarten, so it's exciting that we're able to get to that point. We also expanded our e-learning and distance learning opportunities. We have a lot of students who are utilizing those in middle and high school in order to access time in their schedule to take other classes that interest them that they're not able to do if they're sitting in a classroom, and some learners are able to really excel with those types of courses, so it's exciting to see that we're able to offer them for students who want them.
We're, of course, now starting to get ready for a new school year. So a couple of reminders for the public. Our high school principals went back this week and our elementary principals go back next week. So there are people starting to go into the buildings if people have questions. You can find information on our district website regarding immunization requirements, school bus stops, supply lists, school start times, end times, all of that stuff can be found at k12northstar.org. Specific to school bus stops, we have a really great map that is at k12northstar.org/map. And that you put in your address and it'll show you the closest bus stop and has all that information. So it's great. This year, we're also going to continue to offer our Ignition program for high school students. And this is a program that really is designed to spark success for our freshmen or new students to our community. Every year, especially with our military population, we have a lot of new students who haven't attended our schools. So we invite them in the high schools, the freshmen and our new students on the first day of school, August 16th. The sophomores and through seniors get to stay home one more day. And we give them all of the tools that they need to navigate the school, less stress, fewer kids, meet their teachers, get their lockers. It really has shown to be help kids really get acclimated with their new school. And then they also have mentor students, older upper class students who are able to become that relationship building piece to a new school, which is really exciting. So we get a lot of really positive feedback from folks who are able to participate in those, both students and parents. But then, everybody else still starts on the 16th. First day of school is the 16th. Make sure that that's really clear. Our next regular school board meeting is August 21st at 7 p.m. And since the other two representatives mentioned, I'll put in a plug for school board seats. We have two open. Both myself and Mr. Bartels are not running this time. And so both those seats are open. I believe they're just yesterday, maybe there were some filers. So starting to show some interest, but anyone who has time to dedicate to our community and our district certainly should consider that. And information can be found at the clerk's office or at the school district clerk's office as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Haas. Let's see if there are questions for you. Yes, Mr. Lawrence has a question.
Well, kind of. I just
wants to be moaned.
Like to point out. Well, first of all, Ms. Haas, I totally appreciate the fact that the administration of our school district is a year-round effort, but it's not something that the students want to hear about right now. So just let you know that
my children remind me of that.
Talking about school in July is just kind of wrong.
Something's wrong with that. Yeah.
Right. But I would like to point out that the deadline for filing for all of these races, as I understand it, is Monday. It's next Monday, not next Friday. It's next Monday, July 30th. So there's not much time left.
Very good. Any other questions or reminders or bemoanings? Seeing none, thank you very much. We appreciate you being here tonight and all your hard work. Okay, so that takes us to public hearing. We're going to start with ordinance number 28. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me turn the mic up some. That takes us to ordinance 2018-14, which is an ordinance amending Fairbanks North Starborough Code 18, Title 18, to define brewery, brew pub, and microbrewery, and to add brew pubs and microbreweries as permitted uses in various zones. The sponsors are Mayor Castle and Assemblymember Lajewski. It's on page 69 of your packet, and there is additional information in the yellow folders. Mayor Castle, Mr. Williams, do you have a staff report?
We do, Ms. Dodge. So real briefly, Mayor Castle is wholeheartedly in support of this ordinance for a couple big reasons. One, it's obviously a driver for economic development, helps diversify our downtown businesses, and it's also got some parts in it that help with kind of just controlling the alcohol scene downtown, and he's okay with that. You'll get a briefing from Ms. Mindy O'Neill, the Planning Commission Chair. This went through a pretty extensive public process, and Melissa Kellner from our Community Planning Department. Be advised, there is a proposed amendment from administration. It's just some cleanup amendment that we respectfully asked one of the assembly members to pick up. Basically, it covers some housekeeping on a definition about brew pubs. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Ms. Kellner.
Okay.
We'll let her explain the details.
And then Mr. Lajewski, do you want to mop up?
Sure.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So this ordinance creates definitions for brew pub and microbreweries. It adds those two uses as permitted uses in general commercial, and then by virtue of the way our zoning code is organized, it also adds them as permitted uses in the central business district, light industrial and heavy industrial. And a brewery was already listed as a permitted use, but this ordinance creates a definition for that use to clarify the difference between breweries, brew pubs, and microbreweries. This use is considered compatible in those zones. The other permitted uses that are similar to these that are already permitted include craft distilleries, liquor stores, lounges, liquor establishments, and restaurants. Adding this use is consistent with the comprehensive plan's economic development goals, and the Planning Commission held their public hearing on May 22nd. There was unanimous recommendation of approval. And just to speak briefly to the amendment, the language in the ordinance right now discusses 25% of the sales of alcoholic beverages, and there was some discussion at the Planning Commission whether this should be alcoholic beverages or beer. At the time, the discussion considered that there are other types of alcoholic beverages such as cider or mead that might be included in that category, and the statutes refer exclusively to beer. So the amendment changes that language to be consistent with state statute. And that concludes my report, unless Mindy has anything to add.
I don't. Okay, Mr. Lajewski, do you have anything you wish to add?
I guess I would just ask him to jog your memory. If you recall, maybe you don't, on March 27th, we received an email from Krista Major about the denial of Midnight Sun's liquor license, and it was because this had not been done, this exact reason. And so anyway, that's how my involvement got to be here. So that's all.
Okay, super. Okay, so now we're going to move to public hearing on ordinance number 2018-14. Wow, that was loud. And that is about the brewery and the brew pub. And I don't have anyone signed up. Is there anyone that wishes to speak on ordinance 2018-14? Seeing no one coming forward, I'm going to close public hearing.
Move to adopt. Second.
So it's moved by Mr. Gray and seconded by, I think, Mr. Lawrence. So, yes, discussion, debate, Mr. Roberts.
I have a question for the attorney dealing with, how does the state look at these? Are these all, we're basically creating more different types of bars. Does the state have just one type of license for this? And I've heard, though I've never seen evidence of there being a numerical limit in Fairbanks for those number of licenses, does that come into play, or are these a different type of license in a different field?
So there are specific types of licenses under state law. Brewery license is one of them, and then I believe brew pubs additionally have a license. Yeah, they do. And then as far as the numerical number, those are based on population, and then there's some exceptions to it. And I don't have those stats readily available. They're on the state's alcoholic beverage control website, though. And so they're easily retrievable. I just don't know them offhand.
I'm just curious if this is going to actually allow the expansion of business that the sponsors bring up, or is it just going to replace businesses one by one as licenses get transferred about and people choose to change the way they do business?
I could look it up. I don't know that offhand. Do you know? It is expanding it. Mr. Tacky seems to think it's expanding it. Yeah, I would have to look it up. I'm sorry, I don't know offhand.
Thank you.
Yep.
And Mr. Tacky, you're up next anyway.
Awesome. Yeah, I was going to move to make that amendment, amending line 53 and deleting alcoholic beverages and replacing it with beer, and then also deleting the word "are" and replacing it with "is."
Second. Boy, I'm going to give it to Mr. Quist. So moved by Mr. Tacky, seconded by Mr. Quist to amend line 53 to remove alcoholic beverages, replace that with beer, and to remove "are," replace it with "is." So it now reads, brew pub means an establishment licensed by the state where beer is manufactured on the premises in conjunction with a restaurant and where 25% or more of the beer produced on the premises is sold on the premises. Discussion debate on this amendment. Seeing none, is there any objection to the amendment as presented? Seeing none, it's approved. Any other discussion debate? Mr. Quist.
Thank you. I have a question for the administration and planning commission. So in reading the notes from the planning commission meeting, there was testimony from one citizen, Rick Menzik, who is in the industry, and he spoke favorably. I was curious, did anybody else in the industry at any point offer any opinion on this?
We haven't received any other comments at the department.
The Planning Commission did not hear from anyone else from the public or the industry on this issue.
Thank you.
Any other questions, discussion on this? Seeing none, clerk, I think we're ready to vote.
Mr. Tacky.
Yes.
Mr. Roberts.
Yes.
Mr. Wojcicki.
Yes.
Mr. Cooper.
Yes.
Mr. Quist.
Yes.
Mr. Gray.
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence.
Yes.
Ms. Dodge.
Yes. Would anyone like to change their vote? Seeing none?
8-0.
It's approved 8-0. That takes us to ordinance number 2018-12, and that's an ordinance amending Fairbanks-North Borough Code Title 18 regarding agriculture and livestock in various zoning districts, including to add urban livestock and market gardens as allowable uses, and adding and amending definitions and standards. Sponsor is Mayor Castle. It's on page 111. There's additional information in your yellow folders. And Mayor Castle, do you have a staff? Or Jim, Mr. Williams, do you have a staff report?
We do. We have a staff report. So just to update folks in the audience and who are listening on the air, this is like the epitome of what a public process should really look like. We started this back in the fall of last year. It's kind of an idea, got floated at the Planning Commission. The mayor got briefed on it. We realized there was a lot of moving parts of this, but he appreciated the bigger impact that this could have on the community with relaxing regulations and allowing more use in some of these more urban areas. So we kicked it over to the Community Planning Department. They ran with it. We had several public hearings, and here we are today. So without further ado, I'll kick it over to Kellen Spellman. He's the Deputy Director for Community Planning. He kind of led this project from administration. And then Ms. Mindy O'Neill from the Planning Commission chairperson. Go ahead, Kellen.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. In simplicity, what this ordinance is proposing to do is to create two new uses in the zoning code, market gardens and urban livestock, and add those uses to the existing zones, including supplemental regulations. As Mr. Williams mentioned, quite a bit of background went into the development of this ordinance. Specifically, it appeared to be a community desire for decades. Every year, we would have a number of people come into the department and express desire to have chickens or certain types of livestock in urban zones, or to sell some of the produce from their garden. And in the existing framework of the zoning code, that is not allowed. In the bigger picture, what went into this is consideration of food security in Alaska. Alaska has some of the largest food security issues in the United States. Based on sources, about 95% of our food is produced elsewhere and imported into the state. And Alaska actually formed a food policy council, which produced a report with 4 recommendations on solving some of those food security issues. And the very first recommendation you see up here on the screen here is building personal capacities in agriculture. And you can see the other recommendations, but it was a little bit ironic that many of these were not allowable in our zoning code because of this distinction of scale that I mentioned earlier. Continuing on, this graph, or this chart, is available in full on page 128 of your meeting packet. I'm going to refer to this again in the staff report. It does look a little confusing, but I think it's important to understand because it's the framework of our existing zoning code. So what you see on the top of the chart is all of our zoning districts. I'm going to highlight the residential zoning districts on the top of the chart. And what I have on the left side of the chart is all of our currently listed agricultural uses. And you can see that in almost all of the residential districts and the commercial districts, no type of agriculture or livestock are allowed whatsoever. So this comes back to the distinction in scale in our zoning code, that we don't distinguish between one chicken and basically an unlimited number of pigs. It all falls under the category of livestock. As Mr. Williams mentioned, this was over a year process. This began in May with a memo from community planning to the mayor asking for potential support of a process and an ordinance. Over last summer, we did quite a bit of research, including several expert interviews and 2 very well-attended community surveys, which I'll elaborate on. And in the fall, the Planning Commission was very involved in this, including several meetings of a subcommittee just to look very specifically into this ordinance. And this spring and summer have been the ordinance process, the public hearing process. I want to talk a little bit about the survey because the public was very engaged in this. In the first survey, we had over 700 respondents take this survey. And kind of our take home from this survey was that 80% supported regulating small livestock differently from large livestock. With that said, there were some concerns. Several members of the public, of those 700, expressed quite a bit of concern about loose animals, smell, and sanitation were the 3 highest concerns associated with these. But again, the majority were not concerned about those impacts. And all those results are available in full in your meeting packet. We administered a second survey, contacting everyone that participated in the first survey. And in the second survey, we were under the presumption that the regulations were going to change. And we asked members of the public what kind of the sideboard should be, what the number of chickens should be that's appropriate, what the setback distance of a chicken coop from the property line should be. And we took home kind of 6 messages from that. The number one was that noisy animals should be prohibited. That's what we heard is the highest concern from the public. And the number of animals should be limited based on the lot size. A lot of the members of the public felt that setbacks were appropriate. And waste management standards, we heard a lot of concern about potential waste management standards. There was some concern about the slaughtering of animals on site, and that the animals, particularly goats, should be contained within a fenced area. I mentioned we had several expert interviews. We interviewed several what we considered industry experts, many of which were from UAF Cooperative Extension. And to summarize kind of their feedback, we took that animal management practices were really important, and opinions varied very widely on the number of animals appropriate for a lot. So many of their comments were based on, it depends. One chicken, if the waste isn't managed correctly, could create a negative impact, and 30 to 40 chickens, if the waste is managed correctly, could be done with very minimal impact. So that's kind of, we took these very broad parameters to the mayor, and he asked the Planning Commission for some input on this. He asked the Planning Commission for some specifics, what the appropriate number of chickens are, what the appropriate setback distance is. So we took this to the Planning Commission, and they voted to form a subcommittee, held several meetings, and that's ultimately the ordinance we got at today. There was a memo produced by that subcommittee emphasizing almost exactly what you see in the ordinance before you tonight. And with that, I'm going to go through the exact ordinance that's before you tonight, some of the highlights of that ordinance. It is a pretty lengthy ordinance. So there are 2 new uses being proposed, market gardens and urban livestock. Essentially, market garden is selling produce out of your garden, a small type agriculture use for commercial purposes. And urban livestock, you can see the livestock's listed, rabbits, chickens, roosters, ducks, geese, etc. But larger type livestock like pigs or horses are not included in that small distinction. So up on the screen, this is also available on page 133 of your meeting packet. I have a very similar chart that you saw earlier. And I want to point out that market gardens and urban livestock being proposed in the ordinance tonight would be allowable in all of the urban residential zoning districts, as well as the commercial and light industrial zoning district. And same with urban livestock. With that said, the subcommittee and the ordinance are ultimately proposing supplemental regulations. So it would be an allowed use if you met the parameters in the supplemental regulations. And I can summarize those for market gardens in 4 points. It has to be secondary to a residential use. It cannot be the principal use of the property. No heavy commercial vehicle use associated with the market garden. There are storage and screening requirements of several of the tools, and mechanical equipment restrictions limited to that of a standard type lawn tractor and not large scale kind of commercial agriculture equipment. And the ordinance originally did propose no on-site sales, and the Planning Commission recommended an amendment, and that's what you see in the revised ordinance before you tonight. Similar to market gardens, urban livestock's proposing supplemental regulations, again, secondary to a residential use. There must be property owner authorization. The on-site sales was originally proposed, and the Planning Commission also recommended deleting that provision. Animals must be contained in an enclosure or fence, and that enclosure or fence must meet a setback, either 20 feet or what the setback is in the zoning district, whichever is greater. Waste management standards, and a provision on no on-site slaughter in public view. Also, what's being proposed is numerical limits based on the lot size. So this chart is also available in full on page 124 of your meeting packet. So essentially, based on the size of your lot, you would be allowed to have more livestock, such as chickens or miniature goats, etc. But the baseline is essentially 10,000 square feet. So on a lot, 2,000 to 10,000 square feet, you'd be allowed to have up to 8 chickens or ducks. And for every additional 1,000 square feet over that, you would be allowed to have 1 additional chicken or duck, capped at 18. Similar to beehives, the baseline is 2 beehives. And for every additional 5,000 square feet, you'd be allowed to have an additional beehive on the lot. Miniature goats is capped at 2, and then the total number of livestock is being proposed to whatever the chicken and duck limit is, and there's potentially an amendment associated with that. One externality of this ordinance, right now we have a defined use of domestic livestock, which is allowed in the rural residential zoning district if you have over 80,000 square feet. If you're under 80,000 square feet, that provision does not apply. So we are proposing this to be allowed in rural residential for lots under 80,000 square feet. The proposal is to have the number of chickens slightly higher, an allowance for 1 rooster, so 20 chickens, 5 turkeys or geese, 4 beehives, and goats, sheep, llamas, and alpacas are being proposed in this rural residential zoning district with a limit of 2 on each lot. There's 3 other points of this ordinance that I consider more kind of externalities. I'm going to elaborate on them because I think they're important to talk about. Right now, this ordinance is proposing to amend the definition of domestic livestock to allow for the incidental sale of animal products. Right now, it is not permitted under that definition. And this ordinance is also proposing to delete a very troublesome provision that we've had in code. I'm quoting animals where they are not less than 25 non-hooved animals weighing less than 50 pounds. This has been very difficult to interpret, and it has been interpreted multiple ways over time. And with that, in the rural residential zoning district, urban livestock would be an allowed use, and we didn't find this provision necessary anymore. And then an amendment to the definition of neighborhood community garden, not allowing for an individual to garden, but it would be individuals or families, plural. So one person couldn't claim they had a community garden because of the addition to market garden. At the work session, there was quite a bit of comment, and the Assembly wanted to see a couple more examples. So I pulled some examples of what the proposed setbacks in the urban livestock would be. So this is what I would consider a standard lot. This particular lot is in the Hamilton Acre subdivision. The Hamilton Acre lots are between 9,000 and 12,000 square feet. This particular lot is a 12,000 square foot lot. So the red you see up on the screen, that is the lot line of this particular lot. The yellow is the setbacks in the zoning district, and the blue is what your chicken coop or where the animals are kept would have to be set back. So this particular lot, if the ordinance passed how it is, would be allowed to have a chicken coop as long as it were within this blue shape. I'm going to run through a couple more examples as requested at the last meeting. This is a lot in Shannon Park. Typical lots in Shannon Park are 8,200 square feet to 12,000 square feet. This one's just over 9,000 square feet. And you can see there would be a small area in the back and potentially a small area in the front, but this one would be slightly more limited than the last example. This is what I consider a standard lot in the kind of Riverview Taku subdivision. This is an 8,100 square foot lot. Again, it'd be difficult but not impossible to meet the setbacks with potentially ample room in the rear yard or a small area in the front yard on this property. Other subdivisions are a little more difficult. This is the Aurora subdivision. This is a very standard lot in the Aurora subdivision. Almost all of the lots are either 7,900 square feet or 12,000 square feet. This is a 7,900 square foot lot, a little bit narrower, but there's a kind of a narrow strip in the rear yard that you'd be allowed to keep the chicken coop. And the town side of Fairbanks is very difficult. The town side in Fairbanks, it's really hard to say what a standard lot is because the lots vary so much. I will say more of the lots tend to be longer and more linear. So this was my best attempt at pulling a standard lot. And you can see on this particular lot, it would be very, very difficult to meet the setbacks as proposed in this ordinance. And the final example is of a rural residential zone. Again, these have a 1 acre minimum right now, 1 nominal acre. Much easier to meet the setback provisions. I want to point out, though, that the setback in this zone is larger than the 20 feet. The setback is 25 feet, so you'd have to meet the yellow box on this particular lot. Planning staff feels that this proposed ordinance is consistent with the comprehensive plan, which is the purpose of the zoning code to implement the comprehensive plan. This is elaborated much more on page 135 of the ordinance. And the Planning Commission held a public hearing on this on May 7th and voted unanimously to recommend approval. And before I turn it over to the chair of the Planning Commission, kind of in summary, staff feels that this is consistent with the comprehensive plan. It is a modernization of our zoning code in determining the scale distinction between livestock and commercial agriculture. And with the supplemental regulations proposed, we feel that it does really mitigate any potential negative impacts of having smaller type livestock in residential areas. And with me, I have Chair Ms. O'Neill. She was chairwoman of the Planning Commission at the time, and she also participated in all 6 of the subcommittee meetings, totaling roughly 15 hours of work.
Thank you. So as Kelly mentioned, 6 meetings were held of the Planning Commission subcommittee. There were 3 members of the Planning Commission that were a part of that subcommittee. And these meetings were open to the public. And our very first meeting, we had a lot of interest, actually. There wasn't even enough room to fit in the people that wanted to participate in this meeting. And what we found was a lot of people had concerns over the cannabis regulations and how it would pertain to this. And after we made it very clear that this was not going to prohibit or even have anything to do with the cannabis industry or the regulations that are set out, it's a totally separate issue. Then we had a couple of members of the public who remained that were very instrumental in helping us work through really the expertise of what it is like to raise livestock, and that expertise was very helpful for us to kind of craft this ordinance. Looking at the different reports from around the country, you can really go any way you want with an ordinance like this, and so we made it a priority, obviously, to really reflect what this community was asking for and make this an ordinance that allowed more flexibility with property on personal property rather than an idea of restricting what is actually allowed on people's property, because beforehand there just simply wasn't anything to do on the books pertaining to this issue. So we dived into a lot of the sort of what ifs, the amounts of chickens, the amounts of ducks, goats, small goats, large goats, castrated goats, female goats, pigs, bees. We went through it all, and so we feel pretty good about what's proposed here, that it does actually meet the goals of the comprehensive plan, and it does reflect the will of the community to allow people to use their property in a way that that they want to use it. There was some public testimony that was speaking up against or was maybe concerns about the ordinance, and this really did have to do with consideration of property rights and people maybe not completely understanding what the ordinance was doing. It's a very involved ordinance. It's very long and complicated, just because of the matter that of this issue. You can really, like I said, go a lot of different ways. And so after that conversation, I guess I left with the feeling that the individuals who came here with concerns were really felt like their concerns were answered, and they didn't have as strong of an opinion or concerns about those when they left. The on-site sales provision that we recommended being taken out, we just didn't really feel that there was going to be enough. It was a size issue. People really don't have the space in urban agriculture to sell on a commercial level, and so we felt like that was a good change to make. Other than that, this was a very involved process from the public with the community planning department, which did an excellent job of looking at different options that we have and what's worked in communities our size, larger, smaller, and with that, I guess I'll close and take any questions.
Okay. Any Mr. Williams?
Yeah, just some closing comments. So I appreciate the Assembly indulging I would call it the lengthier version of the staff report. And I asked Mr. Spillman to do that today because we did get a number of comments about the ordinance, and some of them not quite factual, not quite on point. We wanted to make sure that we were fully transparent with what was going on. So I asked him and Ms. O'Neill to kind of expand this a little bit more. I do appreciate that. From Mayor Castle to the staff and to the Planning Commission, Ms. O'Neill, if you could pass this on, he's very, very appreciative of the work that went into this. It was a ton of work, and it's a big step for our community. And then to the Assembly, in your yellow packet, there is 2 amendments that the administration is proposing. One is to update a definition that we kind of probably need to do some housekeeping on real quick. And another one is to fix an oversight when we drafted just a language oversight when we drafted the ordinance. And with that concludes our staff report.
Thank you very much. With that, we're going to open public hearing. And so this is on ordinance 2018-12. And many of you that are in the room remember that you signed up a month ago to testify on this. And here we are. I have your names. So I'm going to start by calling the 4 people that signed up June 24th or something like that. And then I'll open it to the room as we do with all citizens' comments. So first I have Ms. Rosenberg, and then I have Ms. Mullis, if you'd come forward and take the empty seat, give us your name, spell your last name, tell us your neighborhood. Have 3 minutes.
Yeah, I probably won't take that long. My name is Ronnie Rosenberg, Rosenberg. I live in Two Rivers, and I too would like to commend the Planning Commission and the department for a very, very open process. I think it was really well done. People had several different ways to give input, and input was invited. I'm testifying mainly to object to the idea of food security in terms of livestock being a good thing. I think I'm very interested in seeing emphasis on plant-based diets, not only for animal welfare reasons, but also for the environment. That said, if animals are going to be slaughtered for food, it's probably more humane to have that done locally rather than in factory farms. But I did want to put that in because that is meaningful to me in terms of our health costs, in terms of the environment, and of course in terms of the animals themselves. The market gardens, no problem at all. I think that a little bit in discussing this at Animal Control Commission meetings, we've kind of minimized what impact this may have on the shelter. We already, as you saw from the News Minor, have numbers of rabbits. Some were purchased as pets, some were purchased as meat rabbits. After the fair, we always get a large influx of animals. And I think we're going to see more animals. Now, maybe there'll be more adopters. I think we are going to get complaints about loose animals, loose livestock, probably more so than what we've gotten as these animals start to dwell more in the urban areas of the community. It's one thing to have turkeys get out in Salcha. It's another thing when they get out in Aurora subdivision. So I think we need to be mindful of that. And of course, that's a segue into the new shelter and the need for a barn. So that's my testimony.
Thank you, Ms. Rosenberg. Let's see if we have any questions for you.
And I think it's great, let me just add, I think it's great the inclusion that slaughter has to take place not in public view, and hopefully not where people can hear that happening.
Thank you. I don't see any questions. Thank you for coming down. I have Nancy Graff next. Is Nancy in the room? I don't see her coming forward. Then I have Ms. Klepowski. Thank you. Ms. Mullis, please give us your name, spell your last name, tell us your neighborhood, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Ray Mullis, Mullis, and my area is near the college, UAF. I appreciate all the time that they put into doing this planning, but there are a few issues that I see, and so I'll just put them out there. Having over 35 roosters at my property, I want to tell y'all a little bit that if you limit the roosters, limit the uncastrated goats, you will start having a lack of diversity. I don't have to tell y'all about the birds and the bees and how this all works. You know that there has to be, like if 95% of our food comes in, we all know that if there's a catastrophic problem, if that one rooster gets killed by a predator, we're in trouble then. So I'm just letting you guys know that there are a few things about this change that y'all are doing that we are not California. We are not downtown New York. We're Fairbanks, Alaska. We're a Class B borough, and we're remote. We're rural. So, okay, so some of the smaller subdivisions, I can see that there would be a problem with some of this. But if you have the diversity so dialed in that there's only X amount of roosters in this town or X amount of goats, you're going to start having problems with crossbreeding of the bloodlines, which lead to other issues. But I'm just trying to say, if you guys are promoting self-sustenance, self-sustaining capabilities, you can't be so dialing in to these areas. I mean, this downtown, yes, I understand. But when you're talking about, like, I'm up by the college. I'm sorry, I'm commercial. This doesn't affect me whatsoever. But I'm looking at my friends that have goats, and if they can only use one bloodline, in a few years, there's going to be a problem. We'll start having two-headed goats. I mean, I don't know, maybe that'll make us extra money by having some cool, unique show. But the diversity of these animals, if you keep dialing it in, you're going to have problems. So that's the main thing I wanted to say, is that it's just, you just have to think about that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Let's see if there are questions for you. I don't see any. Thank you for coming down and raising that issue. Thank you. It's important. So I'm going to have an empty seat if anyone wishes to speak on ordinance number 2018-12, which is regarding agriculture and livestock. If so, just please come forward. Ms. Klepowski, welcome. Please give us your name, spell your last name.
Cynthia Klepowski, Klepawski, and I live in off Farmers Loop Road.
Thank you.
I'm definitely in favor of ordinance 2018-12 and allowing for urban livestock and market gardens in residential districts. I own 2 parcels. I own where I live, which is out on Farmers Loop, and livestock is allowed there. It's an RE2 zone. It's 5 acres. But I was kind of shocked when I was looking at the screen that a market garden wouldn't be allowed under the current zoning on my lot. 5 acres, I can have a horse, I can have all the, a lot of livestock, but I couldn't have a market garden. I'm too busy right now to have a market garden, but it was just surprising that I couldn't. So I'm definitely in favor. And my other lot is off College Road, so it's 2-family. It's the area where I grew up. My parents owned it. My father had a huge garden in the back, and I think he would have been shocked to know that he usually gave away his excess, but he would have been shocked to find out that he couldn't have sold his extra tomatoes if he wanted to under our current zoning. So again, I think that that's a good change. People care about where their food comes from, and this will allow people to know where their food comes from. And not all the animals that would be kept would be slaughtered for meat. I mean, goats, you have milk, cheese that from them that you can make from their milk. And then, of course, the chickens, you would have eggs and without slaughtering them. As far as the noise goes, I can hear a rooster in a couple of, or in the next road, and I only hear it during the day. I hear it in the morning, sometimes during the day. I don't hear it at 3 o'clock in the morning like I hear the dogs next door. And I love animals. I love dogs. I'm not saying anything bad about it, but dogs will bark at all times of the day. Roosters, farm animals in general, sleep at night. They're smart animals. I have a horse, a goat, a dog, and a cat. So I speak from experience. The only thing that I would disagree with on this ordinance is not allowing full-size goats in these areas on a 10,000 acre lot. I have a standard size goat. We don't say you can't have a Great Dane, but you can't have a miniature poodle. And full-size goats give a lot more milk than pygmy goats do. But I'd rather see this ordinance go through the way it's written than hold it up. But if perhaps this becomes an issue later on, it could be a conditional use. So, for example, my lot on Caribou Way, I have a very small house on it, so lots of room for a full-size goat or two. That's about it.
There you go. Good timing. Let's see if there are any questions for you, Ms. Klepowski. I don't see any. Mr. Lawrence.
It's good to see you. And I guess my question is that even in the summer, my experience, and it's limited, is that roosters, as soon as the sun comes up, they're crowing.
Maybe that's it. They don't crow all summer long.
Yeah.
Well, I don't hear it at 3 o'clock in the morning when the dog's barking next door and I'm wide awake and the light, it's light out there. I hear it, I'll be sitting out on my porch at 8 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock, sometimes even 2 in the afternoon. I'll hear the rooster, but it's not, to me, it's less offensive. And again, I guess I don't want to dwell on that because under this, the residential, we don't allow the roosters. And not to disagree with the prior speaker, but in agriculture areas, you still can have your roosters, if I'm not mistaken. In your agriculture areas, you can still have your uncastrated goats. So we're not limiting totally the bloodlines in the Fairbanks area. It's just in these smaller residential lots that we wouldn't allow uncastrated goats and the roosters. But I'm just saying that farm animals, a small amount, are really not that noisy. And I've been listening this past month, since I sat through 4 hours last month, I've been listening to my animals and to the animals in the area. And honestly, they're much quieter than the dogs.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Ms. Klepowski? Seeing none, thank you, and thanks for your testimony. So we have another empty seat on Ordinance 2018-12, which, as you may have gathered, is about urban livestock and gardens. So please, welcome. Please give us your name, spell your last name, and tell us your neighborhood.
My name is Jeffrey Rentzel, Rentzel. I live in Becca Ridge area, and I'm opposed to this ordinance. Basically, livestock has no purpose, no reason to be in a subdivision. There's no room for them to go. There's no room for them to live. I have 3.5 acres out on Becca Ridge. I got 5 sheep, 3 goats, and about 20 chickens. And I still don't feel that I have enough room. Confining large livestock, such as goats, sheep, in town is basically ridiculous. The waste management is going to be a significant problem. You're going to have, like was stated before, people buying these animals, bringing them to their house, realizing just what it is to feed an animal at 40 below zero when the ice bucket is froze solid, and they're going to get rid of them. The market is going to be flooded, and the animal shelter is going to end up being overloaded with livestock. There's no reason for people to have livestock in a subdivision. If they want livestock, they need to move out in an area where they can really have them, take care of them, and that the animals can live a good life.
Thank you. Let's see if there are questions for you. Seeing none, we appreciate you coming down and testifying. So I've got another empty seat on the urban livestock and urban gardening. Welcome. Please give us your name, spell your last name, and you'll have 3 minutes. In your neighborhood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Ken Scotty. My last name is Scotty, and I live in the Farmers Loop area. Speaking to 2018-12, I'd like to commend the administration on working to modernize and clean up old code, to extend new land uses that the residents want to use, or uses that they'd like to use their land for. On its whole, I see this as a good thing, and I encourage each of you to vote for it. However, I do have a couple of questions. I would challenge the full-size goat restriction. I think that should be included. I think it should be amended to include full-size goats. And the other thing, I'm not clear because I couldn't see it, I didn't find it, but the gentleman from the Planning and Zoning Commission said this was going to be restricted to the same lot for a residential lot, and why we would not amend it to include an adjacent lot. When a homeowner owns the adjacent lot to their property, just because there's a section line, I shouldn't say section line, but a property line, those property owners should be allowed to use their property as they see fit. And I would highly encourage consideration of including adjacent lots.
Thank you, Mr. Scotty. Mr. Wojcicki.
So here, I'm going to phrase this as a question. Sure. If you did have 2 lots next to each other, since it's a complaint-driven process before it goes to code enforcement, who would complain if you put something on your adjacent lot that you owned, both halves?
Who would complain? If anybody complained, it would be the next property owner over, depending on your lot dimensions and size, how many lots there are adjacent to that property. But wouldn't it then be the neighbors adjacent to that? You certainly wouldn't complain about your own use, nor would you be a nuisance to yourself. So why not include the same lot? Or I'm sorry, why not exclude same lot and go to include adjacent lot? Sorry.
Thank you. Mr. Roberts has a question for you.
Technical question for staff.
Yes, thank you.
So I was led to believe in the work session that if the lot was directly adjacent with the lot line, not necessarily with the road, that it would be considered what we might call a zoning lot and would fall under the purview of the lot that we're talking about when we're talking about the livestock or garden that you could have on it. Could you clarify whether I remember that correctly?
Yeah, if I may, we have a provision in our zoning code that if the same property owner owns 2 adjacent lots, 2 lots right next to each other, they can either build across the lot line, which is considered a zone lot, or they can come in and fill out what's called a zone lot affidavit, and those 2 lots are treated as the same lot without the dissolution of that lot line. So there is a process to treat 2 lots as the same lot without dissolving the lot line, and that is covered in this ordinance.
Thank you. Thanks for that clarification. Any other questions or comments? Well, no comments. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Scotty. We appreciate you coming down. And one more time, we have an empty seat on Ordinance 2018-12, Urban Livestock and Market Gardens. Ms. Mealis, since you've already spoken, let's wait until we make sure everybody that wants to speak speaks, and then I'll call on you. Thank you. Mr. Dowdy, welcome.
Asa Dowdy Jr., DOWDY, live in Steel Creek Road area. I would like to really, I was amazed at all the work that's been put in on this ordinance. If we'd have spent time doing maintenance on the riverboat in Nana, we might have it painted. And it would have done more good. This thing is so nitpicky, nobody can follow it. We will keep animal control on the road all the time, plus a couple more. They have no other place to put their animals, they say. Are we going to have somebody go around and checking gardens? Another borough employee? What are we doing? I would feel much safer having a reptile tank filled with brown ruthless spiders than I would with this ordinance. It's nitpicky. It's not Alaskan. We have open spaces up here. Get out of town, enjoy yourself, let people do what they need in their neighborhood. Put 2 sentences here, you can have gardens, you can have animals. That's all they need to know. My neighbors, they do not all agree with what I do. I do not all agree with what they do, but we live together as a community. This is separating a community. My God, I have a garden, and it's on the right way of a road district. Nobody complains about that. It could grow up in weeds or willows. People can use this land and neighborhoods to help each other, not to hinder each other as it will. Please think about it.
Thank you, Mr. Dowdy. Let's see if there are questions for you, Mr. Quist and Mr. Roberts.
Thank you. So I found your testimony a little bit confusing. So are you aware that this proposed ordinance effectively relaxes borough code and increases the freedom of people in the borough to use their land as they see fit?
Can you do 2 sentences saying it can have animals and another sentence saying it can have gardens and not try to overregulate them? Yes, it relaxes it. Relax it all the way. Give them some choices.
Mr. Roberts.
Just technical clarification from Mr. Williams. Is it possible for us to get some brushes to the zoning department, have them jump in on the riverboat Nana and take care of that before winter happens?
Anything possible.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Dowdy? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Dowdy. We appreciate it. And we'll have another empty seat if anyone wishes to speak on this issue. Welcome. Please give us your name, spell your last name, and tell us your neighborhood.
Tara Gildner, last name Guildner, live in Badger area. I just wanted to say I do appreciate that we're starting to look at relaxing some of the laws on doing livestock and having gardens, because a main concern for me has always been food supply. I mean, my dad remembers going through a week in a cold period in North Pole many years ago where food wasn't able to be delivered to the stores and they ran out within a matter of days. And 3 days supply is not necessarily enough. So it's good to see that some of this is getting better. I do agree that there can be improvements as time goes by. I agree with most of the speakers that come up. I don't agree with a lot of the limitations. You know, to me, it seems that survival has become inconsequential compared to cosmetic looks and people's personal monetary gain through property value and other things. So it kind of worries me that our rights don't matter or survival doesn't matter as much as the look of your property. But I am happy to see improvements in some of the freedoms. So thanks, guys, for putting all that together.
Thank you, Ms. Gildner. Let's see if there are any questions for you. Seeing none, we appreciate it. Anyone else that hasn't spoken yet that wishes to speak? Seeing none, Ms. Mullis, it's your turn. We have a special rule that when everyone has spoken, that if someone wishes to, they can speak for 1 more minute.
Carrie Mullis, M-U-L-L-I-S, near college. I just wanted to clarify something that I saw in this, and I guess it would be to the planning group. It says right here in the single-family residential SF20, SF10, and SF5. Could you correct me if I'm wrong? Does that means single-family 20 acres? It doesn't? What does it mean?
So we need you to ask us the question, then we'll do the technical. So if you have a question, so you're curious about what single family 20?
Yeah, is that 20 acres? Or?
If that's your question, though?
Yes.
Super. Let me, is that the gist of your testimony?
That's the gist of my question.
Okay. Let me ask our spot technical people. SF20 is?
It's based on lot size. So SF20 means you have to have 20,000 square feet minimum. Okay. SF10 is 10,000 square feet minimum, and SF5 is 5,000 square feet minimum.
Thank you.
Okay, that answers my question.
Thank you very much.
Because for RA, it means acreage.
Understand. Okay, confusing. Thank you. So I'm going to close public testimony on ordinance 2018-12.
Move to adopt. Second.
So it's been moved by Mr. Lawrence and seconded by Mr. Gray. Is that correct? So I'm going to take a little liberty here in process because we have an agenda that is, I don't know how many pages long. We know that we have a very full night in front of us and things that we must do. And so my question to the assembly is, do we have a sense of this being a multi-hour issue with many amendments in front of us, or do we have some comfort, and do we want to take this forward or at this time, or postpone it because it's a robust conversation? And that's a big liberty, and I'll stop there, and Mr. Roberts has his hand up.
Well, I don't have any amendments at this moment, and I think we should just move forward with this.
Super. Yeah. It's a general gist of the sense of the assembly. Thank you. Okie doke. Mr. Roberts, you're first.
Okay, I do have questions then. So, to the attorney, I'm curious, and this may be administrative too, the interaction between community planning on this and the animal control department. This is a zoning ordinance we're doing. Who's going to end up doing the enforcement? The one zoning enforcement officer that we have, or the animal control officers, or will it be a combination? Or can you speak to that?
So I guess it will depend on what the nature of the issue is. There are a couple things in Title 22 that could potentially overlap here. One of them being at-large animals. They're not limited to dogs and cats or any mammal. So
Does that include the leash law?
If your goat, excuse me?
Does that include the leash law?
That's under proper restraining animals, correct? So if your goat is wandering down the street off your property, that can be an at-large animal under Title 22, and animal control could cite for that. As far as issues like animal waste, under Title 22, those are limited to dogs and cats. So those would not be impacted by this ordinance. And most of the other standards that are in this proposed ordinance would be governed by zoning. So it would be the code enforcement officer and zoning that would handle them. So noise complaints, things like that. In order for them to rise to the level of like a nuisance animal in Title 22, they would have to be getting off property and essentially causing other problems. So
Or be on their property unleashed.
Well, the restraint doesn't, well, this requires them to be in an enclosure, so,
Yep. So
yeah.
then next, I was wondering, looking at that definition of domestic livestock, it said farm animals. So I tried to look up in the definition. I don't even find a definition for animals in the zoning code. So do we just borrow the definition of animals from Title 22, which I didn't go bother to look up? I assume that, I know we have a definition of animals there.
No, we wouldn't cross borrow. So the definitions that are in Title 18 are set forth as applying only to that title. So if there isn't a specific definition included, then we use a common meaning or a dictionary definition unless it's a term of art of some sort. So in this case, you would just use your ordinary dictionary definition of those.
Okay, so there's going to be some subjectivity on some of this. It sounds like on what's a farm animal as opposed to not a farm animal.
I don't know if I would consider it objective or subjectivity. It would be dictionary definition, and then community planning is the agency administering this should have a consistent definition that they apply.
Okay, I just was on a tour of Wiseman yesterday and saw a picture, or saw it somewhere, a little girl holding a leash of a moose, little baby moose, and she's got it on a leash in the garden.
Okay. So this is we do limit it to domestic livestock, so I don't think a moose
Okay,
will qualify.
so I had a question about rural estates and ag. I guess looking on here, so I can see that the rural estates and ag don't don't get the urban livestock because they have the domestic livestock. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Mr. Spillman. And then I was thinking that we don't have the market garden for them because they've got so many, they have all the other agricultural uses allowed.
I believe that's a question.
Correct.
Yeah, so your first question, yes, domestic livestock is allowed outright in the ag zone, the rural estate zone, and the rural residential zone if you have over 80,000 square feet. And we are proposing market garden in the rural estate zone, and it doesn't need to be in the rural ag zone because we already have commercial agriculture is allowed use in that zone.
Okay. And then one question I ended up with that maybe not directly related, but is there a lot of personally or privately owned outdoor rec land?
There is some. I'm not prepared at this moment to talk about the level or the amount.
And then to the attorney, I'm wondering, is this the type of ordinance that we've got grandfathering on? So if somebody's currently got 21 chickens in an area that allows 20, as long as they keep those 21 chickens going, are they use grandfathered, or is there a line there? I want to make sure I understand people who are in a position, because there's no way they can know the situation that every single person on these types of properties are in out there, and some of them may be over this limit. So when this law passes, are they going to be in conflict, or are they going to be grandfathered with what they're doing, and how long may they continue being over that limit?
So they could receive a non-conforming use determination if they met the qualifications for it. Do you want to answer that, Colin?
There's nothing that would be more restrictive in this ordinance. So every zone that there's proposing a chicken limit, chickens are not allowed at in this zone. Domestic livestock is not an allowed use.
Okay, I guess I was thinking that there was a slight hole when it came to
Yeah, there is.
one of the rural ones.
There's 25 non-hooved animals that are allowed right now, and I believe now the limit will be 20, won't it?
Yeah, but it does, that interpretation of that's why we're proposing to delete it. Chickens fall under the domestic livestock, which is not allowed in lots smaller than 80,000 square feet in the rural
Okay, so it's
residential
still
zone.
broadening it.
Yes.
Okay.
So we're not expecting anybody to need to exercise grandfather determinations, non-conformity stuff.
It's
the
our
expectation.
it's our assertion that there's nothing in this ordinance that would make it more restrictive.
Okay, and so then
Are you almost done, Mr. Roberts?
I was just going to make my final comments so that I'd be done. Super. So, so I'm in favor of this because it is enabling more and not restricting anyone as best as we can tell. We're not adding any restrictions. We're enabling more. We're not allowing too much. If you look at the lot size and the setbacks, those small city lots are not going to be able to do a lot of this. So the concerns that people have legitimately of there being too much of these different types of livestock in the city in the small lots, I don't think you'll be able to see a lot of that legally based on this ordinance. I want to point out that the gardens that we're talking about in this ordinance are market gardens. Therefore, if somebody's wanting to grow something to sell commercially, this has nothing to do with personal gardens, and we do not have any restrictions on personal gardens. I believe it's an accessory use if I'm using the right term. And so there's no restrictions on your personal garden on your private property. And so based on that, and based on allowing more people to be able to expand and do more, then I'll be voting for this ordinance. Thanks.
Thank you. I have Mr. Quist, Mr. Cooper, and then Mr. Lajewski and Mr. Lawrence.
Thank you. I have a question and then a motion. So we've heard some criticism tonight, and I was speaking with a constituent earlier today who was very concerned about if this is adopted, that it's going to increase conflict with land use, and that's going to create a neighborly issue and also create a problem for the borough in that it's going to drive the need for code enforcement, that a need that we can't manage. And so I guess I would hope to hear from the administration, do you anticipate that this is going to increase code enforcement demands? And I'm guessing the second part of the answer to this question is no, because of this public process, but I'll still ask it, do you anticipate a significant increase in land use conflicts if this is adopted?
We don't know, to be honest with you. It would all be speculation. We do have a caseload right now that includes quite a few enforcement cases on domestic livestock where it's not allowed. So yes, we do have current existing cases. I'm not really comfortable speculating whether it would increase due to this ordinance.
Okay, and then I guess the other part of that, so if this is adopted and we allow people more freedom to have livestock and gardens on their lots, from a planning point of view, do you see this causing a significant amount of land use conflicts, or do you imagine this being implemented and going forward fairly gracefully?
Yeah, good question. And that was the intention of this whole supplemental regulation section. Is the intention of that whole section was to try to create harmonious land uses as best as possible. So that was the intention. You look at 100 different communities, you have 100 different ways they regulate this. So we put a lot of this back on the Planning Commission subcommittee to really look into that and see what was best for this community.
Okay, thank you. I've got some of these housekeeping motions. I'd move one if I could.
Certainly.
I move to delete the definition of market garden on lines 133 to 136 and replace it as follows. quote, market garden, unquote, means a small-scale production of food producing or ornamental plants grown incidentally for commercial purposes using a variety of growing techniques, including in soil, container, or nutrient solution, in conjunction with and clearly subordinate to a residential use on the same lot or zoning lot. This definition does not include the cultivation of marijuana.
Second. So moved by Mr. Quist and seconded by Mr. Jackie.
I could speak to that briefly.
Please do.
So this proposed amendment comes from the mayor's office, and the purpose is for consistency with language in other definitions in Title 18. This is not a substantive change.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on this? Any objection to adopting the amendment as presented? Seeing none, it's approved.
And then since I'm on a roll, we'll just knock it out if I could. I would move to amend line 235 to delete, quote, 18 in number, end quote, and replace it with, quote, the number of ducks and chickens permitted, end quote. Second.
Moved by Mr. Quist, seconded by Mr. Gray to amend line 235 to delete 18 in number and replace with the number of ducks and chickens permitted.
And this is the other housekeeping ordinance from the mayor's office. The purpose is to clean up a drafting oversight.
Okay. Discussion, debate on this? Questions? Seeing none, is there objection to approving this amendment as presented? Seeing none, it's approved. Okay. Next item.
I've got more questions, but I can wait.
Thank you. I'll put you back on the list. Mr. Cooper, you're next.
Thanks. I've got a series of questions too, but I'll break them into chunks. So I'll start with bees. So I've got,
Just whatever's efficient for us.
right. So I have a series of questions about beehives and some of the proposed restrictions on those. And my first is the definition on line 123, where it says beehive means a removable frame structure used for the housing of honeybees. And the word frame caught my mind because I know there's different types of beehives out there, some with very structured frames and foundation, and some that are not. And I guess maybe this might be a question for legal as well. Do you feel that this definition adequately captures all types of beehives that beekeepers might use?
I think I need to defer to planning on that because this was developed by them, so.
Yeah, my answer to that question was we took this from a beekeeping publication, and I'll go back to you. We did speak with a beekeeping expert as a portion of this. I don't believe he weighed in on this definition, but we also are not beekeeping experts, and this was our best attempt to meet industry standards as proposed by that publication.
I guess maybe I don't want to get too technical on the words, but maybe for sake of clarity on the record here, the intent is to cover all types of human-managed beehives.
That's the intent, yes.
And then I guess I think you clarified a question I had earlier going into this in the presentation, but going into the chart on page, I guess it's line 310, this is in rural residential zones. On lots over 80,000 square feet, so nominal 2-acre lots and up, you could have any number of beehives?
That's correct, yes.
So it's only on 2-acre or less lots that you'd be limited to 4 in a rural residential zone. So really lots from 1 to 2 acres.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
I was just trying to figure out. I was trying to scale, or figure out how the beehives were scaled with different lot sizes, and so I got it in the other zones, but in rural residential. So the minimum lot size in rural residential is a nominal 1-acre lot.
That's correct. Yes.
So from 1 acre to approximately 2 acres in a rural residential zone, you can have 4 hives, and beyond 80,000 square feet, you can have as many hives as you wanted.
That's correct. I will add one clarifying aspect that we do have quite a number of undersized rural residential lots because the minimum lot size used to be 30,000 square feet.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful. Okay. Those other people on the list, so I'll come back in a few minutes.
Okay. I'll put you back on the list. Mr. Lejeski, you're next, and then Mr. Lawrence.
Okay, so if this passes and the sky falls, right? We get inundated with stray animals. There's lots of complaints. We can't deal with them, and we repeal it. I guess it's more of a attorney question. What's the status for grandfather rights?
Would
they stick with the property forever, or would it be like until those animals die and they go away? Or
we have to go to our non-conforming use ordinance, which has provisions in there for abandonment or termination of uses. And I'm sorry, I got to pull them up so that I don't misstate them because they're slightly different on.
You need a minute because I have a question for Mr. Spillman. If you're
could you just give me 1 second because there's a exception for livestock, and I just have to remember, unless you know off your top of your head, Mr. Spillman, but I just have to remember how it coordinates with our abandonment and termination provision. So yeah, unless Kellen knows offhand, it'll just take me 1 second to find it here.
So I'll switch to the other question, and it's one that you already answered today. I just need to hear it again. So it has to do with the deleted language, or proposed deleted language of getting rid of the current, what is it, animals, line 151, animals where they're less than 25. Sorry, I'm maybe looking at the wrong line here. Yes, that's the correct one, 151. Animals where they're less than 25 non-hooved animals, each weighing less than 50 pounds, right? That's the current permitted use in rural residential, less than 80,000 square feet, or maybe it's less than, one number less than that. So how, and you said we're lifting restrictions. It looks to me when I read this that it's adding restrictions in that narrow area, because now it says you can only have, I'm just going back to the chart at the back, 20 ducks or chickens, 5 turkeys or geese, etc. And it seems like those are usually under 25 pounds and they're not hooved, and you could have 25 before.
Yeah, good question, and I'll elaborate a little bit on this. This has been a very troubling section of our zoning code. In our zoning code, the more strict definition applies, and the example I'm going to give you is dogs, a dog team, a kennel, either minor kennel or major kennel. Those are animals, a lot of times weighing less than 50 pounds, and they're non-hooved, but that falls under the use defined as kennel, either major or minor. So that is more strict than this. So over the last decade or so, I can't speak to what happened before that, but the more strict definition of domestic livestock pertains to the chickens, the ducks, etc., as opposed to this language. That's why, in our opinion, it is very troubling, and we hate to leave things to interpretation in code like that.
So then along those lines, are there animals that would be non-hooved, under 50 pounds, that you could have, and that this is somehow getting rid of in those narrow...
In conversation with staff, the last time we can find record of this provision being applied was passenger pigeons, I believe. Passenger pigeons.
So I did find your answer, Mr. Lejeski. So agricultural buildings and livestock are accepted from the restrictions on non-conforming uses, which includes the discontinuation for 36 months. So it would just continue as a non-conforming use.
So the actual use would? As soon as the use is no longer there, then would that grandfather right go away, or does the right to use it in that way stick?
The right will stick, because we right now have an exception from those restrictions, which includes the abandonment or discontinuance provision, and we exclude livestock from that restriction.
Okay.
So it could continue.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence.
I'd like to propose a a brief amendment that is sponsored by Ms. Dodge. It's I move to amend line 275 to change weeks to months. This would read: the total number of miniature goats, standard size goats, sheep, llamas, and alpacas, where permitted, shall not exceed 2 in number over the age of 8 months, rather than 8 weeks.
Is there?
The rather than is my editorial. It's not in the amendment.
Thank you. So it's been moved by Mr. Lawrence and seconded by Mr. Cooper to amend line 275 to change weeks to months. Do you want to speak to that, Mr. Lawrence?
I know that it was stated to us in 1 or 2 emails, and I missed the work session. So, but that a goat, you can't really wean a goat, or shouldn't try to separate a goat, in that short of a time period from its. As I recall, I think that's. What's that? Right. That it's it's not healthy or it's not practical to reduce your goat population back down to 2 before they're 8 months old. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to have genetic variety down the road where you can have new goats contribute to the genetic pool.
Anyone else wish to speak on this? Yes, Mr. Williams.
So from administration, we have some concerns with that, and I'll pass it off to Mr. Spillman.
The minor concern was just larger type animals on the lot. We originally chose 8 weeks in the subcommittee level based on some testimony from some industry experts, but we're definitely not industry experts, and we'll defer to the industry experts. The concern being basically a kind of a more type unlimited number of animals that are approaching maturity.
Thank you. Any other discussion or debate? Yes, Mr. Quest.
Well, I guess I would question the logic, not just of extending the time period, but just switching from weeks to months. Is 8 months actually the right answer, or is this motion being made specifically because that's a convenient way to do it?
I'll pass the gavel. It's been a bit. Thank you. As I recall, the concern was that 8 weeks is too young to slaughter. For goats to be mature enough to be an appropriate age for slaughtering, then it was 8 months, and that's what we were told by also an industry expert. So that's what led to this amendment.
All right. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Tackey.
So then on that point, then we're not limiting the number of them. You're raising them to be slaughtered so you can have 20 of them then.
All right. Any other questions, comments on this particular amendment? All right. I made the amendment, but frankly, it's your amendment, Ms. Dodge, so I'll go ahead and take the vote. Let's vote on this amendment.
Mr. Lajewski?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Tackey?
No.
Mr. Gray?
Yes.
Mr. Cooper?
No.
Mr. Quist?
No.
Mr. Lawrence?
Yes.
Ms. Dodge?
Yes.
Does anyone want to change their vote?
Seeing none.
Seeing none?
5-3.
Amendment passes 5-3.
But let the record reflect that Mr. Lawrence has passed the gavel back to me, and I am on to. Did you have anything else, Mr. Lawrence?
Well, I'm going to speak in support of this ordinance. We all received emails regarding some concern regarding the degradation of the residential, or the potential for degradation of the residential character of these communities. Not because of the market gardens, but because of the livestock. But I don't think there's few places in the world that has less food security than interior Alaska, and we need to address that. And I think that the good created by this ordinance far outweighs the bad, and future assemblies can always make modifications if there's issues with regarding the livestock. But I'm very much in favor of this ordinance.
Thank you. I have Mr. Quist and then Mr. Cooper.
Thank you. For the Planning Commission and Department, we had a couple of testifiers speak in favor of full-size goats as opposed to pygmy goats, and then also an idea was offered about potentially, maybe through another ordinance, but having a conditional use permit process for larger animals, or non-pygmy goats in this case. And my question is, what do you think about that? And the part that I'm most curious about is this idea of using the conditional use process as well for these other types of animals.
Yeah, if I may, it's an idea that was talked about very early on, and it's an idea that we steered away from very early on, mostly associated with the cost of a conditional use permit and the process associated with it. They tend to be costly and very time consuming, and we didn't necessarily see someone desiring or ever, to be honest, going through that process for 1 or 2 larger animals.
Thank you. I think probably say my final piece unless something really exciting happens. I would speak generally in favor of this ordinance, although I do have a number of concerns, particularly this amendment that we just adopted that, if I understand things correctly, would allow somebody to have essentially an unlimited number of goats as long as they were bred on that property and were less than 8 months old, which I think is a major issue and is potentially ripe for abuse. We may end up revisiting that to fix that someday, but that even with that issue, I'd still support this. I guess I could say a lot in the interest of time. I would just address maybe one of the other constituents' remarks. Ms. Mullis spoke about the issue of diversity of the livestock, which I imagine very well could be a significant concern. But I think that we really have to balance that with land use needs. So I think that this probably is creating an opportunity for somebody who's enterprising, who's excited about animal genetics and breeding, and they're very well, I'm sure that there'll be a free market solution to this diversity problem. But I really think that you can't have like a whole bunch of roosters or a whole bunch of smelly boy goats in these densely packed areas. So we do have to strike a balance. But overall, I think this has been a great example of public process, and I'd like to thank the Commission and the Planning Department, and I would speak strongly in favor of this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper.
Thanks. I'll ask the rest of my questions now. So just to clarify, I think Mr. Roberts asked about this or perhaps alluded to it earlier, but would enforcement of these provisions be complaint-driven?
That's correct. We operate on a 100% complaint-driven process right now.
And then my next question is about roosters. In the presentation, you had one of the concerns from the folks you heard from was we don't want roosters, but I see in the proposed ordinance that there is a provision for one rooster in rural residential zoned lots less than 80,000 square feet. Can you tell us some more about what your thinking was by allowing one rooster in those types of lots?
Yeah, great question. And a lot of this came down to the subcommittee level where we looked at multiple examples of 1 acre lots and asked the question, do you feel a rooster is appropriate in this lot? And ultimately it was the subcommittee that did recommend the provision for one rooster based on the size of the lot and that zoning being rural residential.
And to follow on that, when we were talking about rural residential lots, a few minutes ago, you mentioned that there were a lot of rural residential lots that were smaller than 1 acre from when the acreage requirement was different. Did the subcommittee consider that factor as well in making that determination?
We did look at several substandard size lots. Roughly, it's about 15% of lots that are smaller than that 1 acre. But some examples were looked at. Maybe I would defer that to Ms. O'Neill, if I may.
Yeah, if I recall the conversation about the acreage, just because it was such a small amount of people in that zone, the rural residential, and really that the character of rural residential is more acreage, is more land. So we felt that even if we took into consideration the lots that were smaller, that still, because of the nature of the zoning, it was still appropriate to allow one rooster in that entire zone, regardless of the size.
I'm going to propose an amendment, and I'll talk about it if I get a second, but my amendment would be to remove all references to roosters, which would be on lines 138, 219, 247, and 257, and that would essentially take rooster out of the definition of urban livestock and remove the provisions that would allow immature roosters and one mature rooster in rural residential.
I'll second it, at least for discussion.
So it's been moved by Mr. Cooper and seconded by Mr. Lawrence to remove all references to roosters, including that appear on lines 138, 219, 247, and 257, and all essential changes. And seconded by Mr. Lawrence. Do you want to speak to it some more?
Sure. So I generally appreciate what we're trying to do here. I think, though, that the one misgiving I have really came down to roosters and the potential in those kind of relatively small lot sizes to allow for one rooster. I live in a rural residential zone. My lot is 2 acres. My neighbor had a rooster right next door, and granted they don't, so I don't. Ms. Kopasky probably knows better than I do when roosters crow. I haven't had to experience that, but I could see that as being one of the greatest areas in this ordinance to cause conflict with neighbors, and so I wanted to offer this for discussion. That's the gist. We're in a situation where it's complaint driven. And this seemed to me to be the one area out of all this stuff that's being proposed that might lead to a lot of complaints.
Okay, Mr. Roberts.
So,
Mr. Lawrence.
to legal, so if we take out we're taking out the specific word rooster with this amendment. So aren't chickens inclusive of roosters? Obviously, I'm not a zoologist, but when I say chicken, I mean, I know the difference between a chicken and a rooster, but if you're talking chickens generically, you're not separating out male and female. By putting a definition in, we're separating it out. By taking the definition out that applies to the roosters, does that mean that they're still allowed because we're allowing chickens and farm animals in the other category?
Yeah, I was going to suggest that perhaps we want to, and I just have to figure out where we want to do it, whether it's in the definition of urban livestock or later when we talk about the livestock that's permitted, just say excluding roosters, and then the other conforming amendments that Mr. Cooper suggested, but I just hadn't quite gotten there yet. I was still going through the line numbers, so.
So I would like to make other points then while she's looking at that. So I point out that in most of these residential zones, it says no mature roosters shall be permitted. So when we're talking about the one rooster rule, that is only in the rural residential zone. As I said, they've got bigger lots in the rural residential. They're out in the country more generally. And so, and having those bigger lots, they are able to have more chickens. And I don't know, it seems to me that if someone should be able to have a rooster, that would be the place to start, is that rural residential zone. We're already not allowing it in not only the residentials, but in light commercial, general commercial, light industrial. We're not allowing roosters in any of those areas, but we're allowing it just in this rural residential and then the areas that already allow domestic livestock.
Mr. Williams had his hand up. Was it on this point?
We had, Kellen wanted to make a comment.
Would you like to? Thank you. Okay, I thought.
If I may, my concern with the proposed amendment is what's already being talked about, chicken-rooster distinction, as well as chicks, very young chickens, where it's not possible to determine whether it's very difficult to determine whether it is a male or a female. And we would hate to not allow the chick from day one where you can't necessarily figure out what the sex is.
Yeah, Ms. Dolan still answer Mr. Roberts.
So I think to Mr. Cooper's intent, I would leave the removals on line 138 and 219. On line 247, I think it should remain no mature rooster shall be permitted. On line 257, delete the maximum of one rooster shall be permitted and replace it with no mature rooster shall be permitted. And I think that meets your intent.
That does meet my intent. It's much more clear.
So can someone write that up so that we can propose it a little, or can you go back through that?
Sure. So
138.
On lines 138 and 219, you're going to remove the word roosters. On line,
hold on.
Okay, sorry.
138 and 219. Is that correct?
Correct. Line 247, you'll keep no mature rooster shall be permitted. And on line 257, you'll delete a maximum of one rooster shall be permitted and replace it with no mature roosters shall be permitted.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree to that.
Right,
and then you'll have to make the conforming amendment on, let me think on the chart. Do we need to do that?
So,
and then on line, it's the table, excuse me, that's on line 309, there's an asterisk that says one rooster is permitted that will need to be deleted.
Okay. So the proposed amendment to remove all references to roosters has been proposed to be amended to, the amendment, right, to be as follows, I believe. Line 138, remove all references to roosters on line 138 and 219. On line 247,
There's going to be no change.
Delete,
Sorry,
so
yeah,
leave
it
that
had
in.
proposed to change initially, so there'll be no change there.
So we leave that alone. And on line 257, we delete what is currently on line 257 and we replace with no mature rooster shall be permitted. Is that correct?
Correct.
And
I move the amendment to the amendment as read.
thank you. And
Second.
it's been moved by Mr. Cooper and seconded by Mr. Lawrence. Discussion on the amendment to the amendment. Clarifying, yes, Mr. Lawrence.
Well, I would urge that we quickly approve this, and then we can discuss the substantive amendment.
Okay. Is there any objection to the amendment to the amendment? Okay, we have the amended amendment in front of us. Mr. Cooper.
I just wanted
yeah.
to, on the amendment as amended, I wanted to just address one of Mr. Roberts' points. So, over 80,000 square feet, people can still have chickens. They can have as many chickens as they want under and that's back to domestic livestock. So greater than less than 2 acres, say, or right around 2 acres, you still have more. And frankly, my lot is, 84, and the lots in my neighborhood are a little over 80,000 square feet. So it really wouldn't solve my problem in my neighborhood. But when you're getting that close, even in 2 acres, I think just the proximity, it seems like a large space, but the proximity of having a rooster that close, where you have houses situated fairly close to each other in different parts of those lots, could lead to conflict. So that's why my suggestion was out there.
Okay, so I have Mr. Lawrence, Mr. Williams, Mr. Cooper, and I think maybe just spoken Mr. Roberts. Mr. Lawrence, on the amendment as amended.
Well, I'm just going to, first of all, state anecdotally that some friends of mine used to live in Aurora subdivision. They had a rooster across the road. Now, obviously, that's a residential zone. That's not what we're talking about here. But they said that rooster during the summer was totally confused about when sun up and when sun up was, and was basically was sounding off, from 2:30 on, that being 2:30 in the morning. So I understand where Mr. Cooper is coming from, but effectively this is just dealing with the issue of whether you can have mature roosters in rural residential zone. And I'm torn as to whether to inhibit that or not. But I understand where he's coming from.
Mr. Williams, had you already spoken? That was your earlier thing. Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Have you already spoken? Do you have more to add? Mr. Roberts.
I'm wondering if community planning, did you do a lot of surveying of neighborhoods in these zones to see what was out there? Is everything just anecdotal, or did you guys actually kind of do a little bit of canvassing to see what the layout was? I'm thinking, if I remember right, Sunnyside and up there is RR, and but I know they're not 80,000, most of those, up at the top of McGrath, if I'm remembering the name right. So I'm just wondering if we have any idea really on what's out there, if we have a good picture of it.
We do have a good picture of what's out there. We don't have a good picture on who's keeping chickens right now and what the size of lot is.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Quist.
Thank you. Yes, so it's been discussed already a couple times tonight, but I was hoping the planning could just very briefly remind us on this issue what the planning process and the input was and how we landed on one rooster.
Yeah, in general, we took the information from the experts we received. We took the information from the surveys we received. We molded around at the subcommittee level, and ultimately it was the subcommittee that said, I think one rooster is appropriate in this zone. There was not an exact science to it. It was based on kind of the tools we were given and what the subcommittee recommended.
Thank you.
Okay, any last, Mr. Kentucky?
I'm just going to speak in support of this amendment. I think that the rural residential zone is like pretty much everywhere along Farmers Loop, and it seems pretty dense in my opinion. So I think having a rooster there is the biggest point of conflict with this ordinance. And although I generally support the entire thing and we'll be in favor of it, I definitely think this amendment would be a positive thing.
Okay, any last discussion on the amendment as amended? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Gray?
Yes.
Mr. Cooper?
Yes.
Mr. Quist?
No.
Mr. Wojcicki?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
No.
Mr. Tacky?
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence?
Yes.
Ms. Dodge?
No. Would anyone like to change their vote? Seeing none?
5-3.
The amendment is approved, and we're back to the ordinance as amended. And my list is all scribbled out. So we'll start over. Mr. Wojcicki, and then Mr. Tacky, and then Mr. Cooper.
So, Mr. Quist, I received a phone call, I think from the same constituent that you did. She may have been serial calling all of us and getting her word in. And actually, I forget her name. I don't know if you remember her name. What's that?
I do. But
One.
Okay, well, at any rate, she got me thinking about this, and I think I've had a change of mind, because on the surface, this looks like, hey, this just restricts rules, and it does. And at least me, in terms of my ideology, I don't want government controlling people's lives. That's a great thing. But if we think about it very pragmatically, I'm not sure that actually achieves this goal. And I have a couple questions to confirm my logic here, but right now, let's suppose someone has chickens in an area where they're not supposed to have them. What happens, well, I know the answer to this, what happens if no one complains? Nothing, right? They keep raising the chickens, and there's no problem. Well, what happens if the chickens do cause a problem, right, and there's a complaint? So that's my question, I guess, for the administration. Let's say they smell bad. They're near the lot line, and the neighbors can smell them, every day. What happens?
Yeah, good question. We go through our kind of standard code enforcement process. The first step is we receive the complaint. Our code enforcement officer goes out and investigates the complaint and confirms whether there's a complaint or not, and we proceed down the code enforcement route. It usually starts with warning letters and can go all the way to fines in the fine schedule.
Okay, so I guess partly what I'm getting at, under the current system, if someone's doing that, they have chickens, they're causing a problem, there's a complaint. It's pretty cut and dry, isn't it? You can identify the fact that they have chickens, the fact that they're not supposed to, and then act on it.
If I understand you correctly, yes.
Under the new system here, if we have it, someone has chickens, let's say they're next to the lot line like they're not supposed to be and they're causing a smell problem, and someone complains, and the person who's causing the problem, let's say they can move the chickens to an area where they're allowed to, maybe they still cause a smell problem. When the complaint officer comes there, what's he supposed to do? Like sniff the wind, and if it's going the wrong way, then, oh, sorry, I can't enforce it because the wind's going the wrong way, or like that. It just seems like it's very, very messy in terms of enforcement for our one enforcement officer. So maybe you can actually speak to that.
I'm struggling a little bit with what the question is. Would you mind restating it?
Okay, actually, in this scenario, let's say someone has chickens, they're allowed to have chickens, they have the correct amount, but you can smell them.
Yeah, good question.
How does that
So
get, how
if-
does, like, we document the smell?
Yeah, it's very difficult. That language in code is very difficult. We did go back and forth. I'd say that was the most debated section of this ordinance is the smell language. And the language we came up with is, ultimately perceptible at the property line.
I mean, we don't have like a smell meter or, I'm just, do you have to send a human being down there and just document what they smelled? And that's subjective?
Well, we don't have anything in code right now, and that's likely how we would proceed if we received a complaint in your situation.
Okay, then I'll continue on. My facts behind my conclusion are there. So under the current system here, if you want to have chickens in an area that's not allowed to have chickens and you raise them and you don't cause a problem and you don't generate a complaint, there's no problem. The borough's not going to do anything to you. And I actually know one or more people in that boat who raise chickens don't cause a problem. They're actually next to the lot line in this case, but nobody cares. So it's fine. There's no problem. And I'm kind of thinking probably a lot of other people know people in that circumstance. So to me, the current system is break the rules. I don't think there's anything wrong with breaking a rule if it's not, if it's not causing a problem, right? Basically, you're not harming another human being. So they're breaking the rule. They're not harming another person. They're not generating a complaint. No problem. That's the current system. It's not perfect, but basically the point I'm trying to make is if we pass this, I don't really seeing it effectively in practice lifting rules on people because they're already lifted because we have one complaint officer, and in Q4 last year we had 181 complaints, which is up from 21 in Q4 2015. The complaint officer's already inundated. It's crazy. Okay, you wanted me to go on.
Thank you.
So anyway, so I don't see any benefit in terms of effective practical land use of passing this. And then the opposite is, what if the sky falls if we pass this? The sky falling would be lots of new nuisances going through that we can't enforce, and then possible animal shelter issues which have been brought up. And we already got the facts that if we decide the sky's fallen, we got to repeal this. Basically, we can't. And we can on paper, but everybody gets grandfathered in. So we're stuck forever, and this will just be justification for hiring more enforcement officers that the borough can't afford to do now. So anyway, that's my thought. I'll be voting no.
Thank you. Mr. Tackey and then Mr. Cooper, Gray, and Quist.
So I have the same heartburn as Mr. Quist did regarding the previous amendment where we changed it from 8 weeks to 8 months, given the fact that you have like 100 goats or 100 alpacas until they turn 8 months. Is my concern. I can see that strife for problems, but otherwise I'm completely in favor of this ordinance, and I think it's great to be able to expand our food base.
Mr. Cooper.
Thanks. First, I want to say I appreciate all the work that planning put into this, and the Planning Commission, and I know it's been something that's been in the works for a long time, so thank you for doing that. I have, some fear that this is going to lead to more complaints and become a burden on community planning to deal with. And so hopefully, if this is implemented, you'll keep us up to date on how that's going. We've, in several areas, have asked the administration to enforce the code that we have. So anytime we're creating code that requires more compliance and enforcement, that's something else that we have to consider and how we're going to pay for that and how that's going to work. And so it creates more burden on the administration, and I'm wary of doing that. At the same time, I think there's a lot of benefits to this. I think that this is going to not just food security, but allowing people to have a little industry in their backyard. So I'm going to support it, and hopefully you'll keep us apprised on how it's working out as we go forward.
Thank you, Mr. Gray.
Well, just in general, I do support this ordinance. I share the same concerns as the others that this might be creating some additional burden. But I was a little bit lost about what Mr. Lejeski was saying about that this is, in general, less restrictive, but it seemed to be saying you're saying that it's more restrictive in some ways when it comes to enforcement. Anyway, I kind of lost my train of thought when we were going around the room here. But in general, I do support this, and I think that the good does outweigh the bad.
Thank you, Mr. Quist.
Thank you. I'd just like to take a moment to reply to Mr. Lejeski and hopefully get him to change his mind and vote yes on this ordinance. First of all, I don't think that we should be encouraging borough residents to violate borough code. And just because they think that they can get away with it and that nobody's going to complain. What I think is trying to be attempted with this ordinance is to ensconce the private property rights of individuals in this borough so that they know they can read the code and they can know what they can do legally. And I think there's a lot of value in that. I think that's one of the things that is most valuable that this borough does. And then to your other point about you kind of letting the genie out of the bottle, we let all of these animals out in the borough, and then turns out there's a lot of problems, and now we can't walk it back because all of these uses are grandfathered. I think that that's a legitimate concern, but the only thing that I can say at the moment to assuage that concern is that this has gone through a pretty remarkable public process, and I think that the product is really good, and I'm optimistic that this is going to create opportunity for people who live here while hopefully not creating too many land use conflicts. So I would encourage you to change your mind again and vote yes, please. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Roberts.
So I agree with Mr. Lejeski, Mr. Cooper, that when you put an ordinance like this in place on something that has been overlooked for a long time, that you just create the opportunity for enforcement that wasn't there, and you actually can create more problems, and it can be an issue. And I thought about that on this, but I certainly believe that we should do our best to make the laws as good as we can, because eventually somebody may decide to enforce on part of it, and I'd like it to be more fair than less. So I do think we should pass this. It really ends up pointing out kind of how zoning is a very imperfect system, the way it permits things instead of disallowing things, and it creates conflict just in the way zoning gets applied and the fact that we have limited enforcement, which for most of us is a blessing, but it's still something you've got to watch for. But I do think we need to get this in order so that all the people that are doing it will now be legal and won't have to worry about the enforcement officer visiting them. And we've got some parameters, and people can get guidance on that when they want to do something. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Lejeski.
So I guess to Mr. Quist, unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to be changing my mind. When we're coming up with these rules, I just can't. I get the feeling, I don't know that I can explain it well in logic, but I get the feeling almost like we're trying to play God. Nitpicking these rules and so forth, and I feel like we have a sense that we're more powerful than we are, like people are actually going to follow these rules. And so, anyway, I'll just leave it at that, but to Mr. Gray, more succinctly, my thought on this is, in reality, in practice, I don't think that this actually increases anyone's property rights because of that example I used before. Right now, you can break the rules. If you don't cause a problem, no problem. It's done. But so therefore, effectively, there's no upside. The potential downside is if someone has those chickens, right, and they're causing a problem. Right now, we can factually say they have chickens, they're not supposed to be there, and act on it. Under the new rules, we got to prove that they smell bad with a smellometer or whatever. I know it's not in code, but I mean, it's like Anyway, I'm done.
Thank you. Mr. Quist, it's...
I appreciate the leeway here, but this is germane. So, to Ms. Jesse's point that this doesn't increase the property rights of individuals at all, how about you have a situation where we have two neighbors who maybe don't get along very well for whatever reason, some arbitrary, completely unrelated reason. One of them would like to have chickens, and under this proposed code, they would be able to. Now, in a situation where the code's adopted, that neighbor could have chickens and not have to worry about their neighbor filing some capricious complaint, okay, and using borough code as a tool to fight their enemy. So I think that passing something like this does really add value because it lets people know what they can do on their lots. It lets people know what they can expect as a neighbor. And there's a lot of value in that. And just having people operate extra legally, it doesn't solve any problems. And I think it really only causes them. Thank you.
Mr. Cooper.
Thanks. I'm going to actually change the topic, and this is a question for Ms. Dolan. And I was hoping you might comment on the interaction between restrictive covenants and subdivisions and our zoning.
So covenants are private contracts, essentially, that would get enforced in Superior Court in a civil action between neighbors. The borough doesn't get involved in the restrictive covenants. So our zoning code exists, I guess, exclusive of those. So people can be more restrictive than our zoning code with those covenants, but they can't be more, I guess they can't allow more than our code would allow.
Right, and I guess I raised this issue just for folks who are listening online or who are here, if we adopt this ordinance, still check your covenants in your neighborhood. Because I know that my covenants in my neighborhood prohibit a lot of the stuff that's being allowed by this ordinance. So.
Okay, are we ready to vote on our ordinance as amended, Mr. Wojcicki?
I just want to tell Ms. Quist, I didn't think of that. You're right. However, I'm not aware of any instance of that happening, and if we table this and it doesn't go forth, and I hear of such instance, my vote would become a yes.
Okay, are we ready to vote? Speaking of voting, on the ordinance as amended, please call the roll.
Mr. Cooper?
Yes.
Mr. Quist?
Yes.
Mr. Wojcicki?
No.
Mr. Tacky?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Gray?
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence?
Yes.
Ms. Dodge?
Yes, would anyone like to change their vote? Seeing none?
7-1.
It's approved, 7-1, and we're going to take a 5-minute break.
Oh my God, stop.
I'll give you a couple more.
Okay, we've got a really long agenda, so I'm going to call us back to order. Thank you, everybody. That was a pretty close to 5 minutes, and I appreciate it. We all needed it. We're back. Ordinance number 2018-18 is our next ordinance, and that is an ordinance amending Fairbanks North Star Borough Code 8.04.130B to add a presumption of timely mailing for taxes due. The sponsor is Assemblymember Roberts. You almost got promoted to, it's on page 287. Mr. Roberts, do you have staff report?
You bet. So this is a simple ordinance to give people a little more slack. As you know, the Fairbanks mail isn't always as reliable as we'd like, and as they get tighter and tighter, I certainly noticed at my local post office that they keep lowering the level of service and making their people work harder, but cutting hours and doing different things. And so there's a concern that was brought up this last year of someone who didn't think that their letter got postmarked on the right day. And so right now, currently, we're working based on that postmark. So what this does is it just says that if someone gets their tax payment in the mail and it's received within 1 week of the due date, it will be presumed to be postmarked on the payment date. So this just gives people a little bit of slack. And I think we should always try to find ways in government to give people more flexibility because there's always edge cases out there. There's always special situations. And it also ends up saving us time because we won't have to deal with appeals on those special situations. So I'd encourage your vote on this very simple ordinance.
Thank you. So that concludes the staff report, and we're going to now open public hearing on ordinance 2018-18. I had Ms. Mullis signed up, and if there's anyone else that wishes to speak on an ordinance amending or on ordinance 2018-18, now would be the time to come forward. Ms. Mullis, please give us your name, tell us your neighborhood, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Okay, Carrie Mullis, Mullis, near the college, up by the university. Thank you. I support this. I think that's a great idea, but I wanted to add a little level to this. Why can we not save a lot of money, which obviously Fairbanks North Star Borough needs that, and make our billing available to us through the Fairbanks North Star Borough website instead of having to rely on the mail, which I still hold that last year I did not get my tax notice in the mail. This is opposite of making the payment. This is receiving the notification that you owe the national debt. And I think y'all should, I think you would save money. You wouldn't have to supply envelopes. You wouldn't have to produce all that paper. I can't imagine what the savings would be. But surely we have someone here in Fairbanks North Star Borough that is capable of putting the billing on the website that we can access it ourselves.
Thank you, Ms. Mullis. Let's see if there are questions for you. I see 2 hands, Mr. Roberts and Mr. Quist.
So are you referring to just the bills you receive, or are you referring to being able to pay online?
Oh, no, I know you can pay online, basically, through a credit card. No, I'm talking about receiving the bill, and then that way we can just print it off if we and mail the payment in, instead of having to wait for it to come in the mail. Last year, I did not receive it in a timely manner, and I didn't think about it because we were dealing with issues at the farm. And when I realized we hadn't received it, and I came and I got to speak with Mr. Tony Ray, which was not as much fun. So I'd rather just be able to just like you can pull up your Fairbanks Memorial Hospital bill. You can pull that up online. You have a code, and then you can make the payment online, or you can, that way you know what your billing is.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Quist.
This discussion just answered my question. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for Ms. Mullis? Seeing none, thank you. We appreciate you staying with us. Great, thank you. Thank you. And Mr. Scotty, please give us your
My name's Ken
name.
Scotty, and you spell my last name S-C-O-T-T-I, and I live in the Farmers Loop area.
Thank you.
I'm generally in support of this ordinance. I do have to ask the question how we will define received. Are they stamped? Are they dated? That leaves some subjectivity in there. But I not only support this ordinance, and like Ms. Mullis, I'm going to change the subject a little bit, but going forward, I'd like to see more like this that help people pay their bills. I have also had problems getting my tax notices timely. I've been in a battle for years, one that has never been resolved. There's a physical address and there's a mailing address, and I keep I keep a mailbox which has been repeatedly had my mail stolen. I've had some where the U.S. Postmaster has returned stolen mail to me, having been known stolen. And even this year, I own 2 pieces of property. I received 1 tax notice at my P.O. box, my mailing address, and the borough still sent the other tax notice to my physical address. That shouldn't be. Moving forward with that, to be honest, whether it was an online system where we could log in and have a user code and a password, this is the 2000s. We should be able to receive those notices in a preferred method that's not snail mail. And it typically takes about 2 weeks for me to even get that notice by paper copy. Why that is, I can't answer, but it's out of your hands and out of my hands. When it shows up in the box is what's important. Why couldn't we receive those notices if elected by text? Why couldn't we receive those notices by email? There are ways, well, there's no confirmation currently by mail that we received them, so you wouldn't have to have a confirmation if they were received as long as they were sent to the requested place. In addition, I'd also like to see the ability to pay by credit card like the rest of the world where we don't incur additional fees. That's adding insult to injury. Every business out there doesn't mark up because you're using a credit card. Why we're getting charged extra? That's just not right.
Thank you, Mr. Scotty. Let's see, Mr. Roberts has a question for you.
Like to ask a technical question of the attorney. If you could explain to us, is there something in state law that prohibits us from allowing people to just pay with a credit card without a extra fee?
I don't think there's anything in state law. I think that was a decision that was made because we get charged a service charge that we would essentially be absorbing a cost for some taxpayers and not others. So it was determined that it should be added to the bill, if I remember correctly. But was that correct, Debbie? Yeah, Ms. Brady is.
And we also collect on behalf of the cities. And so the taxpayers who pay in a manner that doesn't cost the borough money are then subsidizing the taxpayers who pay by credit card because we have to pay something to accept credit cards.
Okay, I guess this isn't the appropriate venue to talk more about this.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Scotty? Thank you. Thank you for coming down. Seeing no one else coming forward, I'm going to close the public hearing. Move for motion.
Move to adopt.
Second.
So moved by Mr. Gray, second by Mr. Techie.
Majeski.
I'm sorry, Majeski. Discussion debate? Mr. Majeski.
Sure. So you probably remember from the work session, the mayor had a concern that this was basically, in essence, in a way, it was like moving the date back a week. So I've got a question. Let's assume everybody did that and they all started postmarking their stuff exactly 1 week late, and so they'd be assumed to be on time. Would that have a significant cash flow problem for the borough? Would that present some sort of challenge?
I don't have the figures on how much we get in P&I in that week. What I did do was, I believe we received, so in that week, we wouldn't collect P&I for, on the first due date, about 100 payments, and then we wouldn't collect P&I on the second due date for about 200 payments. That was just what I did for mail, not for all the other methods of payment. And so you're talking about our penalty is graduated, so it's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I didn't do that analysis for you, so I can't really answer you, but you're talking about just 1 week of P&I.
Well, no, we're talking about no penalties. So in this case, everyone could mail, if this is passed, if 100% of people paid right by mail, and they postmarked it and got the stamp 1 week late, it would be assumed to be on time. There would be no penalty assessed. That's my interpretation. I think the attorney's shaking her head.
Yeah, so I think what you might be getting at is this doesn't just apply to residential, it applies to every taxpayer. So if I'm a very large taxpayer, and we have some that owe in the millions, you're saying if they gamble and instead of paying on the due date, they mail it the next day and we don't receive it to day 7,
exactly,
we wouldn't have the revenue in our accounts when we would have normally expected it, nor would we get penalties and interest for the fact that it was late. So I think your question is really, would that create a problem for us? But I think that's too hard to predict.
Yeah, so we have a 90+% collection rate, although some of those are delinquent. So you're talking about probably just area-wide, $80 million, and then you're also impacting the 2 cities potentially. And for them, it could be a really big deal because they're much smaller, and I don't know what their cash flow cycles are. We aren't a part of their cash flows, but it would impact their abilities to make payments and when their payments are received.
Okay, I have Mr. Cooper, Mr. Quist, and Mr. Lawrence.
I have 2 questions, and the first one may be for Ms. Dolan or Mr. Roberts. Does it make sense to have both the not considered delinquent of postmarked language and the proposed new language in the same?
It does, and the reason it does is because you only get the presumption if we actually receive it at the borough offices within that 7 days. So if we get a payment on day 8 and it's actually postmarked
so that protects that person.
on time, yes, they would be covered.
And the second question was, it says within 1 week, and I guess is that specific enough?
Yeah, it's 7 calendar days, yeah.
All right, that was it, thanks.
Mr. Quist?
Thank you. I have a question for Treasury. So the status quo, or if this proposed amendment is adopted, or this proposed ordinance is adopted, which do you see having an easier workflow in terms of paperwork? And I guess the thing that I'm thinking of is envelopes. So I mean, I work in an office, and I sometimes have to keep envelopes with records, and I'm not trying to pick nits here, but it really, for me, makes things a lot more difficult than regular pieces of paper. Does this ordinance, if it's adopted, do you have to retain more envelopes? How does this potentially change your workflow?
It would increase the workflow.
Could you elaborate on that?
Well, we would have to for audit purposes and for substantiation, just internal controls, we would have to keep more envelopes in order, and we would have to date stamp the envelopes as something that we don't currently do. We'd have to date stamp these envelopes as the day that it was received, and then we would have to retain the envelopes, tape them on the back of the receipts, and then that would be our backup, and then that documentation has to go to records management and be scanned, so it increases their workload, because we will have payments from different methods. We'll have people walking in at the counter that we will be charging P&I for, so we have to substantiate why we did not charge P&I for these, for the auditors and our internal controls, so it would increase the workload.
Thank you.
Mr. Williams, were you on this point, or did you want to?
Just to add to it, so we've had a number of discussions in the mayor's office about this ordinance and the ethics and the morals of paying your bills on time, yada yada. What we've pretty much come to the conclusion on those areas is whatever the assembly decides the code's going to be, we're going to enforce it and administer it like it's our idea. But to add on to Ms. Brooks's comments, one of the practical things that we discussed was one of the instructions the mayor and I give to staff is be honest in all dealings, right? And so if I have a person come up to the counter with a check 1 or 2 days or 3 days late, withholding information that if you just go dump that in the mail and get it postmarked and then send it back through the mail, you will not have to pay the penalty. That's something we thought could be probably exploited, and because we would want our staff to tell the whole story about that opportunity. So I just want to add that in there.
Mr. Lawrence.
Question I suspect for legal. We're collecting property taxes just not only for the borough but for the cities as well. And are you aware as to whether the cities have they have deadlines and penalties and interest as well, don't they?
I believe they follow all of our deadlines because by state law we collect all their taxes. So
their deadlines are really our
ours.
deadlines.
So they're going to follow this.
Okay, so they're bound by whatever we do with regards to deadlines and penalties and interest.
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Tacky.
About how many payments do we receive that fall just right after the deadline because it's postmarked within a week afterward?
How many we receive that we're going to not apply P&I for?
No, that you're going to be applying, like if this wasn't passed, like in our current state of affairs, how many payments come in just like barely missing the wire on a regular basis? On average each year?
I didn't do it for all payment methods. I only did the research for the payment for mailing, and that was about 100, a little over 100 for the first half and a little over 200 for the second half.
100 and 200
in that
first
1
accounts.
week.
Dollars, right? Okay. Thanks.
Mr. Roberts.
Well, I guess, I'm actually amazed that they don't already record the date of receiving the payment in some way, like a stamp, or some means that they already have a verification process so they can prove up on it. That frankly amazes me because I would think that would be part of the workflow, having that date and having it recorded in some fashion. But taking their word for it that they're going to have to implement this now and this will be a new thing for them, I still believe that it is more important to give our citizens the flexibility. For helping out, probably not all 100 or 200 would necessarily be helped out by that, but if you just take that as a round amount, that's a fair amount of people. Probably most of them tried to get it in on time and they just didn't quite make it. And things happen in life, and I really hope that we're going to give our citizens a flexibility, even if it does mean a little bit more work on our end. And I do hope that they'll find a way to make that workflow smoother and find a more efficient way to do that. But thanks.
Anybody else? Mr. Lawrence.
Well, I think that the genesis of this ordinance is, last year when we had some people appeal penalties and interest for getting their payments in late, and they had mailed, and their mailing had not been postmarked on the day that they delivered it to the postal worker. From my perspective, since we're only dealing with postmark, we're only dealing with people paying by mail. The better way of doing this is to say that there's no penalty if the envelope is containing the payment is no later than the day after the due date, instead of giving them a full week. What we're trying to do is give people a chance who utilize the mail to have the benefit of the doubt if their envelope isn't postmarked the day they deliver it and to the post office. And I think there's real, there's going to tend to be abuse if we give them all 7 days. And as far as just being, these deadlines are. Mr. Roberts, what this ordinance does is all it does, in a sense, at least for people paying by mail, is it's just postponing the deadline by a week, but it's still a deadline. So I don't see what the point is, whether it's the deadline is November 1st or November 7th, there are going to be people who are going to miss the November 7th deadline. And so, I'll be voting against this. If we're going to address the issue of the post office not postmarking envelopes on the day it's put into a box or given to a mailman, then I think we should do it by just allowing or considering payments on time if the postmark is within a day after the due date. And I don't know whether, I would move to amend. If you give me, I would move to amend this, the lines. Well, I'd have to think about it, but to me, that's the more appropriate way to deal with it. The issue.
People up, you can
right,
play with your amendment. Mr. Quick and then Mr. Roberts.
Mr. Lawrence just raised my concern, and I have a feeling that Mr. Roberts is going to address it. So.
Okay, Mr. Roberts.
So when you're looking at the drop dead date and the postmark, you're looking at something that somebody believes they can control, right? They can get it mailed in on time. And the case we saw last year was someone who thought he had that under control, and the system didn't work his way for whatever reason. Okay, but when you're talking about it's just going to show up in a week. If someone tries to push that, they don't know, and we in Fairbanks really know this. We have no idea how long it will take a letter mailed from Fairbanks to get back to Fairbanks and get to somebody. It can be the next day, it could be the next week. We're just in this corner of the world where it doesn't work well. It's non-deterministic. So you're not going to have a lot of people gambling. You will have people miss this date, just like people miss dates. Okay, this doesn't stop everybody from missing the date. They will miss the date, but this will stop people who think they did the right thing and got it mailed right, according to what they thought would work, and then have it not work because of a system that they and we can't control. Now, Will there be abuse? Of course there will. There's going to be abuse of the new chicken laws we just passed, okay? There's always abuse. I don't think you should base the laws. You should do your best to not cater to making it too easy to abuse, but I don't think that you should base your laws based on abuse. And then the last thing I want to say is that this, within 1 week, could certainly be amended to some amount of working days different than week. That was just a number I picked out that I thought was reasonable. And so it's open to amendment. Thanks.
Okay. Mr. Williams and Mr. Tacky, and we'll back to you, Mr. Lawrence, when you're ready.
Right. So I just speak to Mr. Lawrence's amendment, whether it's 1 day or 7 days or 10 days or 30 days. It's still the administrative burden, the new burden would be the same. So I just want to make that point.
Mr. Tacky.
Well, I would disagree with Mr. Williams' point on that. I actually like Mr. Lawrence's point exactly because you're going based off just the postmark date that's actually on the envelope. So with one extra day, if it was, oh, I dropped it in the mail that day because the receptacles only get picked up at like 4:30 that day, but you dropped it off before midnight. It was after they closed, and it'll be postmarked the next day. It'll definitely be postmarked. But I don't agree with having it as a whole week out and having it as the date being received because it would be rife for situations in which someone comes to the desk to pay it. They're late. Well, I can go drop it in the mail. It's only going to be 2 days to get back. So I think that leads to more problems. But then in the whole general sense of getting somebody who is always late to set their watch 5 minutes fast, they're going to learn that their watch is 5 minutes fast and they'll be late again anyway. So I think leaving the date as it is also fine too. So I could go against this amendment as drafted, or I would be amenable to Mr. Lawrence's amendment potentially.
Mr. Gray?
I just want to say I like Mr. Lawrence's idea, and I think that maybe going by a postmark is not a bad way to go with this, but I was just going to say perhaps we should be mindful of when you can't get something postmarked at the post office, which would be a weekend or holiday, or a Sunday or holiday rather.
I'm sure we already do.
I'm sure you are. So.
Yeah. Mr. Ledusky?
So this is for staff or him with long institutional knowledge. In the cases in the past, what's the, where people have kind of appealed, got to the process, how many days beyond the date has it been? Because I think the two over the last 6 months or so were a day? 1 day?
We've had a few that were just 1 day, and some were more than that based on personal crisis or something like that. But some of them are 1 to 2 to 3 days.
Okay, so can you ever recall any, say 4, 5, 6?
Oh, certainly.
Okay, so we have had those, but they're much less frequent.
I think they're about the same. I think the ones that tend to appeal are those ones that are really close, and the ones that are longer have not tended to appeal. But that's just anecdotally my own personal memory.
Right, and then piggybacking off of Sean's comment, if the people who are going to appeal it 1 day late now might appeal 2 days late because 1 day late's a new threshold. So I don't.
Okay.
Mr. Tacky, sorry.
So, Mr. Lawrence, you're up.
All right. I would move to amend line 28 to add after post office, the word post office, the words on or before the day after the due date, to insert those words, and also to amend lines 31 and 32 to delete the proposed additional language of this ordinance.
Is there a second?
Second.
So it's been moved by Mr. Lawrence and seconded by Mr. Tacky to amend line 28 to read after post office, on or before the day after the due date, or if deposited, etc., and to eliminate the language being added on lines 31 and 32.
So it would read, a payment will not be considered delinquent if postmarked by the United States Post Office on or before the due date, the day after the due date. And then precedents are if deposited in the borough's collection drop box prior to the midnight on the payment dates as stated in subsection A.
Okay, I have Mr. Gray and then I have Mr. Roberts.
Well, I was just thinking about the point I just brought up. For instance, September 1st this year is on a Saturday, so the day after that would be a Sunday. So how do you get it postmarked on a Sunday?
I see Stab.
Okay, sorry.
The Borough Code says that if it falls on a weekend or a holiday, it's the next business
Okay,
day.
great, thank you.
And then Mr. Roberts, I believe you were next.
Yeah, so ultimately, I actually don't see this helping at all because it doesn't get over the fact of this agency out there that we can't control and the timing. That's what brought this issue up is there's something out there the citizens can't control and we can't control, this other agency that performs this duty. And so this is to give a little slack in the case because we're in a particular situation here in Fairbanks of how our mail is processed. All it does is it just changes the deadline by a day if you mail it. And so I don't see this solving any of that problem. Moving the deadline a day may help people who like to push it and they can push it an extra day. But for the people who just want to get it in, they want to get it in on time. If they get hosted by the post office, they're still going to be back in front of us saying, hey, blah, blah, blah. Same thing last time, it's just a different day now. It doesn't solve the problem of things that are beyond the citizens and the borough's control. And that's what we're trying to look at is to give slack for those situations where there is no control that we can do something about. The situation they control of when they mail it out, that's within their control. But not when it gets postmarked, that's not always in their control.
So on the amendment, I have Mr. Quist and Mr. Lawrence.
So I do believe that this amendment would solve some problems, specifically if this had been adopted before the issue. I think it was the genesis of this ordinance. I believe the gentleman who came in and his taxes were postmarked a day late. And really, you could say there was this other agency, and that was the reason that it didn't happen. Or you could say that he was playing brinkmanship with the post office in the borough. And in that situation where that guy was trying to mail his taxes at the last possible moment, because that's what he does every year, as a protest, and it didn't work out for him 1 year. This ordinance, as potentially amended, would have solved that problem, would have prevented this problem for that gentleman. So, I think that this amendment is a lot better than just a, carte blanche week, whatever, you didn't pay on time, and then you decide to go get a postmark and then bring it in and avoid the penalties. So I think the amendment's an improvement over the original proposed ordinance, and I do think that it actually would solve some problems for some people, namely the gentleman who got us talking about all this.
Mr. Lawrence.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add to what Mr. Quist just said, but I have no reason to believe that the post office is going to require more than 24 hours to postmark an envelope that it receives. And this does address the issue that was raised previously. And so I would urge its adoption.
Okay. Anything else on this, Mr. Roberts?
Just reminded me of a comment from a few years back when they were looking at Obamacare, talking about the government having the efficiency of the Postal Service and the compassion of the IRS.
Mr. Lajewski.
Mr. Lawrence, if this amendment passes, will it turn your vote to yes for the overall?
Yes.
Thank you.
Anything else on this amendment that's before us? Seeing none, please, clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Cooper?
No.
Mr. Quist?
Yes.
Mr. Lajewski?
Yes.
Mr. Tackey?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
No.
Mr. Gray?
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence?
Yes.
Ms. Dodge?
No. Would anyone like to change their vote? Seeing none,
5-3.
it's adopted 5-3. We have ordinance 2018-18 back in front of us as amended. Mr. Quist.
I have a question for Treasury. Now with the ordinance as amended, where we're just going by the postmark, and it can be up to postmarked up to 1 day after the due date, how does this now impact your workflow if adopted in comparison to the status quo?
Well, obviously, we would only be retaining those envelopes 1 day instead of the 7, so it would decrease that.
But aside from that, it would be the same. Aside from that, the window's smaller, but the actions that you have to perform within that window or resulting from that are the same. Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion? Ms. Dolan.
So I just want to maybe caution you that this means that any taxpayer, the day after our normal due date, could go to the post office and get a postmark and be considered timely. So it's no longer, Mr. Roberts' original proposal was a bit of a risk for people. So while it gave them a presumption, it was a risk that if they deposit it in the mail, that it was going to get here on time. So this is now a sure thing. So like I said, you have really large taxpayers in this borough that may hang on to their money a day longer because they can just pay a day later. So I just want to make sure you realize the distinction between the two.
Mr. Cooper.
I think to summarize, the due date is the day after the due date.
Yeah,
Correct.
Yeah. Mr. Lawrence. I'm sorry, Mr. Roberts.
Well, I don't know how helpful it is at this point. I wanted to bring up one other use case. People in Fairbanks who are out of town and maybe trying to mail from a village post office, which has one employee who might be sick that day. They're not able to get that postmark because it's just shut down that day. Those things happen. In fact, we even have small post office here, some of them by contract, where they might be closed today because somebody couldn't make it in or something happened. But at this point, the date's been changed, so I don't know. There's not really a point anymore. But I wanted to point that out for anyone listening.
Mr. Tackey, is your hand raised, kind of, quasi?
No.
Okay, thank you. Are we ready to vote on the ordinance as amended? I'm sorry, Mr. Cooper.
Yeah, I guess I'll just say, I mean, I think Ms. Dole made the point that's bothering me a little bit, at least in the ordinance that Mr. Roberts proposed, there was some risk on the taxpayer, and I probably would have preferred to have a shorter amount of time than a week, but there's still some risk that it's not going to get there. And this, as amended, I don't support it because it just might as well just make the due date a day later. So.
Anything else? Okay, on the ordinance as amended, please call the roll, clerk.
Mr. Roberts?
No.
Mr. Tackey?
For the listening audience, there's smoke coming out of Mr. Tackey's ears as he thinks about whether or not he should say yes or no.
No.
Mr. Gray?
No.
Mr. Quist?
No.
Mr. Lajewski?
Yes.
Mr. Cooper?
No.
Mr. Lawrence?
No.
Ms. Dodge?
No. Would anyone like to change their vote? Seeing none?
1-7.
It fails 1-7. And that takes us to ordinance 2018-19, an ordinance amending chapter 8.48 Fairbanks North Star Code regarding hotel motel room tax penalties. The sponsor is Assembly Member Roberts. It is on page 289. Mr. Roberts, do you have a staff report?
Good. So, we'll see. I thought the last one would be pretty quick.
know.
We'll see how this goes. So this is another really simple one. This has to do with bed taxes and the fact that right now there's a very large penalty if you're found to have not paid your bed taxes. The problem is a lot of people are jumping into bed and breakfast, getting on Airbnb and other type websites, and they're not knowing that they have to deal with bed taxes. And then the borough finds out and sends them a bill, which has a lot of penalties. So this is just to make this simpler on that, and it's really to codify what they've been doing in practice, where if they come in and they take care of it, that the large penalties won't apply. Those large penalties were really there because of the large hotels put in before we had bed and breakfast as a real going concern. So, so that's it. It's pretty simple.
Thank you. Mr. Quist, did you need to talk about
I have a
public
potential
measures?
conflict of interest. I think the answer might be no, but I think it's important to declare nonetheless. My parents own a commercial property, which in the past they've rented in a way that required them to pay hotel bed tax. They don't currently, but it's very conceivable that even this year, let's say, they may choose to re-enter that sector and be renting rooms and be subject to hotel bed taxes. And so at this moment, I don't feel like I have a conflict, but then there aren't any concrete plans, but it could happen. And I just felt like I need to put that out there.
Is that in the city or outside the city?
It's in the city limits.
So that's managed by the city hotel motel.
But
Correct, because we provide for an exemption within the city. But regardless, I don't think you would have a conflict because you don't actually have any financial interest of yourself or a family member in this ordinance. This is just an ordinance of general application that says how we're going to govern penalties. So it's not directly related to an interest that you would have right now.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep.
Okay. So, back on track here. I'm going to open public hearing on 2018-19, which is an ordinance amending chapter 8.48 Fairbanks North Star Code regarding hotel motel room tax penalties. I have no one signed up. I see no one coming forward. I'm going to close public hearing.
To adopt. Second.
Moved by Mr. Cooper, seconded by Mr. Gray. Discussion debate. Seeing none, clerk, apparently we're ready to vote.
Mr. Lajewski?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Gray?
Yes.
Mr. Tackey?
Yes.
Mr. Quist?
Yes.
Mr. Cooper?
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence?
Yes.
Ms. Dodge?
Yes, would anyone like to change the vote? Seeing none?
8-0.
It's adopted 8-0. That takes us to marijuana license. Oops, Mr. Quist.
So I have a conflict.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Quist and Mr. Tackey both have conflicts.
Me first. All right. I own a marijuana product manufacturing facility, and so these potential 2 licensees may be vendors or customers of mine.
Thank you. Your excuse? Mr. Quist?
My in-laws are licensed cultivators, and for similar reasons as to Mr. Tackey, I think I have a conflict. And then also, I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but I did notice in the meeting minutes that there was an error that said that my in-laws had a manufacturing establishment, and just wanted to make clear it's been cultivation. But for the same reasons as manufacturing, I think I'm conflicted. Thank you.
Your excuse, thank you. So now we're on to marijuana license, new product manufacturing facility, license 15800. It's on page 294 of our packet. It's Baked Alaska LLC, doing business as Baked Alaska LLC, 2745 Hanson Road, Unit B, Fairbanks. Mr. Williams, do you have a staff report?
Yes, Ms. Dodge, we do. So Borough Administration took a look at the product manufacturing facility license application for Baked Alaska LLC. The property is zoned consistent with its intended use, and Borough Administration recommends no protest.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to open public hearing on Baked Alaska LLC. I don't have anyone signed up. I don't see anyone coming forward, so I'm going to close public hearing on Baked Alaska LLC.
Move to file no protest.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Gray, seconded by Mr. Lawrence to file no protest. Discussion, debate. Seeing none. Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Roberts.
No.
Mr. Wojcicki.
Yes.
Mr. Cooper.
Yes.
Mr. Gray.
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence.
Yes.
Ms. Dodge.
Yes. Would anyone like to change their vote? Seeing none.
5-1.
It's approved 5-1. That takes us to marijuana license, new standard cultivation facility, license 13479, called North Star Fire LLC, doing business as North Star Fire LLC. It's 3780 Leisure Street, Suite 3. Mr. Williams, do you have a staff report?
We do. I'm getting to my tab here. Stand by.
Thank you.
So Ms. Dodge, Borough Administration took a look at the standard cultivation facility license application for North Star Fire LLC, DBA North Star Fire. The property is zoned consistent with its intended use, and Borough Administration recommends no protest.
Thank you. So I'm going to open public comment on North Star Fire LLC. Again, I have no one signed up. I see no one coming forward. I'm going to close public hearing on North Star Fire LLC. Look for a motion.
Move to file no protest.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Gray and seconded by Mr. Lawrence to file no protest. Discussion, debate. Seeing none. Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Roberts.
No.
Mr. Gray.
Yes.
Mr. Wojcicki.
Yes.
Mr. Cooper.
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence.
Yes.
Ms. Dodge.
Yes. Would anyone like to change their vote? Seeing none.
5-1.
That was a short break. Come on back, guys. And we'll go on to ordinance number 2018-23, which is an ordinance amending Appendix E user fee schedule, parks and recreation fees, facility rental, pools, and attachment C of ordinance number 2018-20, FY 2018-19, to amend fees for swim team practice hours. Sponsors are Assembly members Lawrence, Dodge, and Roberts. And I'll ask Ms. Roberts, would you like to give a staff report?
Sure.
Would you let Mr. Lawrence do? I'm happy to ask him first. Your choice.
Whoever wants to.
Well, yeah, I'll be brief. Under the user fees section of the 2000 FY 18-19 budget, we increased a lot of recreation fees to recreational facilities in the borough, but we definitely specifically increased the fees for swimming pool facilities, and specifically we increased the fee for practice hours of swim teams. It was originally $10 an hour. We increased it to $40, which certainly created a difficult situation for these teams from a budgeting perspective. And so the purpose of this ordinance is to reduce that increase from $40 down to $25 an hour with regards to their practices.
Thank you. Mr. Roberts, would you like to add anything?
Sure. I think, as pointed out in the budget meetings, that this was too much for 1 year for an increase, and that we just needed to be more reasonable. And so I'm glad that that we got some testimony, and others saw that we also needed to move this up to a slower rate. So I hope you'll support this ordinance.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to open public hearing on ordinance 2018-23, which is an ordinance amending Appendix E user fee schedule, parks and recreation facilities, facility rental, pools, and attachments to amend fees for swim team practice hours. I have 3 people signed up. I'll start with Mickey Rosser and Joanne Sexton.
I'm going to withdraw.
Okay, and Ms. Sexton left. Yeah. Thank you. Ms. Mullis, and then if anyone else wishes to speak on this, there'll be an empty seat.
Carrie Mullis, M-U-L-L-I-S, by the university. Goes to the Muskox. I agree that it's hard for, I was a competitive swimmer from age 3 to 11th grade down in Texas. I understand that the schools have to use the pools or else they can't swim, they can't compete, and then they can't go and do what they do. I think it just all comes back to figuring out how to allow these kids to do what they need to do to get their swim practice in without causing undue cost to the borough, which of course relates to higher taxes for the property owners. And I'm not sure if dropping it is the right thing to do. I think that this is a totally hard decision because it affects the kids. But I think if you look at the Japanese schools, just take a step back and look at how they run their schools. The children clean their schools. The children help manage their schools. We give our children everything. Everything. And so I'm not so sure that a little bit of sweat equity wouldn't help. I'm not so sure that lowering the costs is the correct answer. I don't think our children are as well balanced. So I'm not sure if lowering the cost is the right thing. I know the young man, I say he's young, that comes up here and talks about people doing community things. He's already left for the evening. But I'm kind of with him. If you want the community to take pride in the community needs to be involved. And I think with the kids, maybe there should be sweat equity or something. When I was a kid, we had to do things. We didn't have to clean the pool, but we definitely had to pick up after swim practice, and we couldn't leave our kickboards all over the place, even though we had great fun throwing them everywhere when the coach wasn't looking. But we had to do things. And so I think maybe there should be other alternatives.
Thank you, Ms. Mullis. Your timing is perfect. Let us see if there are questions for you. Yes, Mr. Quist has a question for you.
Thanks for your testimony. So, in general, the borough's not trying to make a profit, and
Oh, no, I know.
And as a rule, we subsidize a lot of these activities. Swimming is something that's important to you. Do you have a feeling as to a percentage that the borough should be subsidizing the cost? So, let's say, just to pick a round number, it costs $100 for an hour of pool time. Okay, how much should the user pay? $100, $50? If you'd like to venture an answer.
Well, I would think that if you have to subsidize it all, I think I would look at that. Maybe the kids couldn't clean the pool, but maybe they could come and do something else, mow the lawns. I think that the children, if they're going to use the pools, need to give that total value. Does that answer your question?
I could ask one. Yes, it does. But if I could ask one more, please. So, are you aware that the current rate that we have, $40 that we're considering amending down, is already a subsidized rate?
Right, and I'm saying that y'all shouldn't maybe subsidize down. I don't know what percentage that the borough is subsidizing at this point, but like I said, if you look at the Japanese schools, the children are required to do things to help their community to provide them with the school. So what I'm saying is maybe, and this isn't something that you can wake up and fix tomorrow. I understand that, but I'm saying maybe don't drop the fee, but encourage the kids to come up with a way to help pay for a portion of that fee. Does that make sense? Pride in community. They're athletic. They can do something.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. We appreciate you staying with us. I have an empty seat if anyone else wishes to speak. Mr. Scotty, welcome back.
Thank you. Ken Scotty. Last name is Scotti, and I live in the Farmers Loop area. I don't necessarily have a problem with the reduction, but I have to ask the question. So it sounds like we raised the fees for swim teams from $10 to $40. It depends on how you want to look at it, but a 400% increase. And why, if we're realizing that we went too far, are we only stepping back for swim teams? Why aren't we applying that equally across the community? Either the increases should stay the same for all users, or if we're going to step back a little bit, why aren't we doing that for all users? Why are we picking out one particular group? Everybody has a cause. Everybody has a difficulty paying more. It impacts the budget, but that's my question.
Okay, thank you. Let's see if Mr. Roberts looks like he might have a way to answer that.
Did you know that while we did raise some of the other fees, that they weren't raised 400%? So they weren't raised equivalently.
I did not.
Yeah. Any other questions for Mr. Scotty? Seeing none, thank you. We appreciate you staying with us and asking good questions. Anybody else coming down? Seeing no one coming down, we're going to close public hearing.
Move it up. Second.
Moved by Mr. Tacky and seconded by Mr. Gray. Okay. Discussion, debate, questions. Mr. Lajewski, Mr. Cooper.
Well, I predict this is going to pass. I think you'd all think the same one. So my message to the swim teams would be prepared for next year for the possibility of another rate hike. I don't know how big it might be or how, but anyway, that's all. Be prepared for what next year we'll have.
Mr. Tacky?
My comment was just a clarifying point. It was a 300% increase, and we just reduced it down to a 150% increase. So splitting the difference in half there, and then, be prepared for next year, as would be interested in looking at other ways to actually change the fee structure so it could even potentially be like a lane-based one based on how other community pools actually charge swim teams across the country. So.
Mr. Cooper.
So I just wanted to ask Parks and Rec staff what the reduction in if this were adopted, how much would that reduce the amount of money that you take in for user fees? Sorry, we've got lots of figures.
I wasn't sure what you were going to ask, so I brought lots of. It's going to be approximately $24,000 revenue reduction.
Thanks.
Mr. Quist.
Thank you. So I'm sure I'm in the minority here, but I would speak against this ordinance. And it's not because I don't have sympathy for the swim teams, and it's not that I don't feel that that's a very valuable activity for quite a few people in this community and something that should continue. But I feel that $40 an hour for a swim team to rent the pool, that's still a really good deal. And if you compare that to other fees in Parks and Rec, if you want to rent a sheet of ice at the Big Dipper, it's like $150 to $250. If you want to rent, this is for an hour, if you want to rent one of the outdoor rinks, it's $50 an hour. Our cost at the borough for a sheet of ice that's outside in the winter that doesn't need lifeguards is a lot less than it is for a pool that we're trying to figure out how to pay for overall. That we have to staff, and the cost to access swimming in general is a lot less than it is for some of these other activities. You need a swimsuit and a towel, okay? And whereas you have these other activities that have a lot more cost associated with them. So I really don't feel that $40 an hour is too much to rent a pool for your swim team. And I know that it's a shock. I think that it's been way too undervalued up until this year, and I'm glad that it's starting to have parity with some of our other services, especially services otherwise that are cheaper to deliver. That being said, I imagine that this is going to pass, and then, in future budgets, we can try to strike a better balance, something that hopefully shifts some more of the cost to the users in this case, specifically since it is a very expensive service to maintain. I don't have a swimming pool at home because they're really expensive. Nobody's got a pool, but that's what we have a community pool. It's expensive and we need to pay for it. Thank you.
Mr. Lawrence and then Mr. Roberts.
Well, I don't disagree with Mr. Quist, but except for the fact that this is a 1 year. This fee can be revisited by next year's assembly, and I presume it will be. But we're giving these swim teams a chance to absorb, or more of a time to adjust it and absorb a little less of the increase so that they can adjust for it in the coming year. And I had another point, but I guess I have a question for the administration. You're saying that your estimate is $24,000 reduction in fees, but the impact statement says 13. Is that just, you've looked at it more closely?
That was only for one team. I neglected to factor in both teams.
Both teams. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Roberts.
So I guess I'd like to point out two things. First, when the swim team gets the pool, as we've learned, many times they don't get the whole pool. They take a certain amount of lanes, and the rest of the pool can be used by others. Whereas with the rink, you're pretty much taking the whole rink when you get it. Also, the swim teams have to supply their own lifeguards. They've got certified coaches. There's a level, there's some money they have to put into it on their end. I can't speak to all the details, but there's some stuff that happens there. These coaches have to have a level of certification, so they end up having to pay for that. So I'm saying it's just not completely apples and apples, that comparison. But as it is, I do think we just need to take care of them for this year so they can at least plan, and maybe they can work with assembly members next year on crafting something that fits a better balance.
Mr. Quest.
Thank you. I'm very surprised to hear from Mr. Roberts that we've somehow outsourced our lifeguard responsibility. I didn't think that was the case at all, and I'd like the administration to respond to that, please.
The borough provides lifeguarding staff. The swim teams provide coaches who have some level of CPR and rescue skills, but are not certified lifeguards.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Lajewski?
I just wanted to piggyback a little bit on Mr. Roberts and to add on to what I said before. When I said be prepared for next year, don't mean that sound like a threat. It just means what I really mean is talk to us before the budgeting time and tell us what works for you and what or what doesn't work for you, and let's work it out.
Thank you. Any other discussion, debate? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Cooper?
Yes.
Mr. Quist?
No.
Mr. Lajewski?
Yes.
Mr. Tackey?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Gray?
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence?
Yes.
Ms. Dodge?
Yes. Would anyone like to change their vote? Seeing none?
7-1.
It's approved 7-1. And that takes us to ordinance number 2018-7, an ordinance amending Fairbanks North Star Borough Code 20.16.020, lease of borough land. Sponsors Assemblymember Roberts. There's additional information. It's on page 528. Additional information and proposed substitutes by Assembly members, by Assemblymember Roberts and Assemblymember Lawrence in yellow folders. So, Mr. Roberts, would you like to give us a staff report?
Sure. So this came out of the process. The next ordinance dealing with sales of borough land and how we can sell more land, which came up this spring to the Assembly, and we, the LMAC who had originally recommended, the 4 members spoke against it and said, hey, we see some problems with this, please send it back to us. The Assembly sent it back to LMAC, the Land Management Advisory Committee, whatever it is. And so we ended up with them looking at it for a few meetings and coming up with a few proposals. There'll be a substitute on the next ordinance, but also part of it was this leasing ordinance. And so part of the problem when you look at the land sale ordinance is that we're worried about somebody leasing land just so they can get the opportunity to buy land without competition that you'd normally have through the normal land sales process. And so we're worried about the abuse that might happen. And so this brings in the point of, hey, maybe we should do competitive leasing. And so by doing that, instead of just giving a lease to the first person who comes up and says they want it, we have a competitive leasing process, and that way they there's less potential for abuse. There's more chance that if it's a useful piece of property, that somebody else will come in and give them a run for their money, so that there's more competition. But and mostly it's not that whether it will happen or not, it's that people will be aware that it can happen, and they won't jump in thinking they've got an easy road to flip a lease to a sale. They'll realize it might take more effort than that, and thereby dissuade them from starting a process that they weren't necessarily doing it for the reasons that we're creating these ordinances for. So I'm going to pretty much just go over the substitute because it clears up a lot of problems that were brought up in the work session.
Mr. Roberts, before you go, I seem to have 2 different substitutes. I
Yes.
think others do too. Can you tell us which one you're
So I'll
speaking
do
to?
the substitute that says by Lance Roberts.
Both of mine say violence. Oh, I see. No, yeah, thank you. Got it.
Okay, on the by Lance Roberts on the left.
Thank you.
So, so we've got land interest in there. Now, this is an amended land interest from what we originally looked at on the land sale ordinance, and in that ordinance substitute, you'll see that amendment also. It's just because we need the same language for this. And it basically says land interest is not just an ownership interest, but it's somebody who has a lease or mineral interest, but specifically excludes easement interests. We thought there were way too many issues dealing with easements, so the LMAC wanted to exclude easement interest from being able to utilize this kind of mechanism. So then, go to line 37, we're basically changing the resolution that is normally brought forward for a lease to an ordinance. The important part of this is that automatically just gives it more time, but it automatically gives it public hearing. So the public has a specific time to talk about this ordinance. And then we changed some of the language in substitute from the work session so that well, first I broke it up into 2 parts. We've got the original language saying that that we may have competitive process. That's down actually in paragraph C in line 45. So we're still keeping the original possibility of doing a competitive process. But then we're adding in a must-have situation. And the way that comes about is we do a notification, and the radius for that is adjoining properties and properties adjoining that. So 2 levels deep of lots. We picked that as opposed to a feet distance because a lot of our land is out there in the wilderness with very large sections of land, and we wanted to make sure we notified a decent amount of property owners or people with interest on that. And so we'll send out a notification, and then they can come in and say, hey, I would like to bid on this. I'm trying to find the exact language here. Lost it. If more than one person in the notification area submits a request to lease the property. So somebody in that notification area comes in and says, hey, we're interested in this lease also. Okay, and so that says, okay, now we're going to have a competitive process. So we have a notification process, and then that forces, if somebody's interested in the notification area, to have a competitive process. Or we have the original language still in here. We've changed substitute to allow that so that you could still choose to have a competitive process on non-residential land. And then That's pretty much it. And another line about making sure things are done with an ordinance. So basically, after that happens, then the administration will go out and they will create a process. We've changed in the substitute bidding to a process that was brought up in the work session so that they can create like an RFP type of process and go through that to put it out for proposals to bid the area. So we tried not to specify that too much because there's just too many possibilities there. But they'll have to use some type of competitive process so that people can submit bids. I'm calling them bids, but we're changing the language, of course. But they're going to submit their applications, their proposals. I guess is the correct term, proposals. And then those will be chosen. Then they will be brought back to the assembly to approve that chosen proposal. So there'll be another ordinance coming back to the assembly, and they will approve that proposal. So hopefully you guys got all of that out of me stumbling around through it. But
thank you.
So this is an involved ordinance. It changes a process. And as Mr. Lawrence is going to point out, the most important part is that we're going to an ordinance instead of a resolution, and I would agree on that point. And I think the rest of this is just to help stop any problems from coming up and to allow more people a chance that they didn't even know existed. A lot of people don't know they have the opportunity to lease Berlin, and you can tell we've got a sheet of leases, and there's very few leases. I think there was two that were pointed out of the type that we're really talking about. Now, I guess I do want to point out one more thing in the substitute on line 53. The requirements of this subsection do not apply to leases to other governmental units. So I exclude leases to the state or even to other entities of the borough, like if we even do that. I don't know if we do that, but anything we would call a lease to other governmental units or to leases within existing park facilities. That was brought to my attention, and that's a huge amount of things. You think of Pioneer Park and all the possibility things that are leases or that we think of as leases. And so I wanted to avoid all of that. Those are really different situations because they're not really in a position to buy land on something like that. I'm sure there's an edge case out there somewhere, but I'm not going to worry about it. So I did put in those exemptions to cut down on the amount of leases that we need to deal with, and that's it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lawrence and Mr. Tackey, do you want to give a briefing on your proposed substitute?
You bet. Mr. Tackey and my substitute would amend the ordinance or amend the code to a lesser extent. In fact, our substitute would limit the revision of code to provide that rather than leases being considered by resolution, which requires half as much notice and less opportunity for the public to comment, that any proposal to lease borough land would have to be submitted in the form of an ordinance, which, as I say, provides more notice and more opportunity for the citizens to be heard. In that respect, Mr. Roberts' substitute and this substitute are the same. Mr. Roberts, but other than that, Mr. Tackey's and my substitute doesn't change any other provisions in the code regarding leasing borough land. The competitive process or bidding, well, the competitive process is still something that may be provided for in certain, but is not required. And it's not even required if there's interest between two different persons or entities. It simply just requires that this process be submitted in the form of an ordinance.
Okay, that takes us to public hearing. And this is on, make sure I've got the right, 2018-07, and that's an ordinance amending Fairbanks North Borough Code, lease of borough land. I have one person signed up, and that's Ms. Mullis. And if there's anyone else that wishes to speak on this, now would be a good time to take the other seat. Welcome, please give us your name, spell your last name, and tell us your neighborhood.
Mary Mullis, M-U-L-L-I-S, and neighbors to the Muskox. I'll change it around a little bit, so it's getting kind of boring. So I had a question about this. And I guess the question is, currently the process, I'm assuming, for leasing a Fairbanks North Star Borough property is just an application, money, maybe a credit check, or I'm not sure what the process is. My question is, how many more days will this bidding process keep the borough from receiving funds? Someone had estimated to me that it would add approximately 197 days or so with a bidding process on these properties. And again, Fairbanks North Star Borough, last time I looked, was not flush in cash. And so is there really that much corruption going on in the people wanting to lease these properties to flip it up to purchasing these properties that we have to stop the income of money? I mean, that's kind of the gist of my question. It's a weird question, but
Fair question.
it's all about money.
Okay, and that's basically your testimony. So
Yeah,
okay.
it was a question.
Let's see if there are questions. I don't know if that's a technical question that can really be answered.
Looking at me, I have to defer to Ms. Moda because that's pretty technical.
Yeah, you're really wondering how much we would earn in 170 days on a lease. Is it?
Well, yeah, or how long that would stop a bidding process. I mean,
the two questions.
Yeah.
So leases are, the types of leases we're talking about here would be based on fair market rental value, and that just depends property to property. It's hard to tell.
170 days worth of rent.
What we can say is that if it's a business that wants to start a business, they're less likely to wait around 9 months than they would be to wait around 3 months.
Thank you. Okay. Any other questions from Ms. Mullis? Seeing none, thank you. I appreciate it. Great, thank you. And I have an empty seat. If anyone else wishes to speak on Ordinance 2018-07, Mr. Milne, please give us your name, spell your last name, and your neighborhood.
Hi, thank you. Clark Milne, M-I-L-N-E, and I'm on Coppet Street in kind of western downtown. Thank you for the chance to testify. Many of you know me, local engineer, and want to make sure I mention a Alaska Mining Association member and the chair of the LMAC. Technically, Cantor, not trying to speak specifically for LMAC since I don't represent the entire thing, but I will point out that I had signed off, and one of the most interesting pages in your 600-page packet is page 531, which is the LMAC recommendations on this that you asked us to come back with you on.
I totally agree with what Mr. Roberts said. Yes, the primary purpose in our trying to make some recommendations were to make sure that there were more, to move to an ordinance, therefore there's more public input on circumstances when you're going to lease some property. That's very beneficial. The changes in the potential revised substitute ordinance would make it a one-step. There wouldn't be two. That's not a problem. But I do have two serious concerns and believe that you'd be going totally against the substitute. Substitute would go against two of the ones cited in there. You'll notice that the first one is specifically exclude easements because it's such a minor interest. It wouldn't be appropriate for subsequent direct purchase, direct sale stuff, which will come in the next ordinance. Also, change the approval action from lease or from resolution for a lease to an ordinance. But three, LMAC said, and I signed off as it being an accurate representation, require notification of the proposed lease to property owners and adjoining land interests in the same manner as Title 18 rezoning notifications. It is indeed important so that adjoining landowners know that there potentially is a sale, and it could potentially be lucrative for the borough, but it definitely has been a problem in the past and needs to be I personally am very much against that, leaving that out. Number 4 says, require competitive bidding only when more than one party declares interest. That's been left out too. I think probably it would be a matter of policy, and the borough management would, or land management would handle it, and that'd be fine. My comment, though, is I'd rather go with Mr. Roberts' substitute than Mr. Lawrence and Mr. Tacky's substitute. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. I see Mr. Tacky has his hand raised.
Yeah, my question is regarding on number 4, requiring a competitive bidding process. Were you tied to the bidding portion then, or was the process of something that could be more altruistic, winning out?
Not tied. What we were imagining that there would be a fair way for if two people identified interest because they had become alerted to the potential leasing of a property, that they would be able to, we'll say compete, and provide one. It could be not over the counter. It could be, a voiced auction. It's more likely to be the normal process that land management does. It's just a sealed bid. Pretty simple. They do more than one at one time.
And then you mentioned about a property sale, but this is just for the lease one.
Correct.
Okay, so but you feel like people need to be notified when they're just leasing property next to other people?
Yeah, that's correct. That's our really highest interest is just like in the other borough processes that planning handles, Title 18 rezoning, and that when something's going to affect you at that level, you get alerted. And out to the second tier, just as Mr. Roberts had said, it could be that you're even a half mile away or something, but at least you get alerted because you're second tier of properties, adjoining properties.
Okay, but any particular reason? I mean, like, I can understand a property sale being something that's a little more intense than just a lease, like someone's temporarily utilizing a space. And then also within the same vein, number 3, there you said just adjoining land interests, and so that made me think of like a single tier one when his substitute goes for 2.
Right, and I have a specific reason why I'm approaching it this way. I think you're quite aware that next ordinance would help the borough to have direct land sales for exactly the reasons that were detailed in land management's 2-page write-up there in the packet, that it'd be great to have a little more freedom in having direct land sales. Well, exactly these kind of leases would be a path. And by doing those notifications, someone could say, oh my gosh, I have such and such a property. Instead of having someone lease, maybe I should really identify just what kind of interest I have. It's that direct sale. It could be forever, when you do the lease. The lease isn't necessarily merely a lease if they follow the responsibilities. That's why the changes that were made in the direct sale document.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Mellon.
I have a question for you. The second half of number 2 says eliminate the requirement for a second assembly action to approve the results of competitive bidding.
Right, and I think that was, I don't know if it still remains, it was in the very original ordinance proposal that was brought in February or whatever, and then you'll remember we needed to bring you back, we need to have a couple meetings and then bring back some recommendations in April, which we did. And in that one, there was going to be an even longer process. Because the assembly, even to get started, would have to have a hand in it, and then it would come back again for an ordinance.
Thank you.
So I think that's been accomplished.
Any other questions for Mr. Milne? Seeing none, thank you. We appreciate you coming down. I don't see anyone else coming forward, so I'm going to close public comment.
Ms. Dodge, we take a quick break at this point.
We may take a quick break. 5 minutes?
Sure.
Hey, thank you, everybody. We're going to call our meeting back to order. And I believe in...
Move the ordinance.
Thank you.
And I move the substitute for 2018-07.
Second.
So-
Clarification of substitute by Mr. Roberts. I'm seconding.
So it's been moved,
Good clarification.
the ordinance has been moved by Mr. Cooper and seconded by Mr. Roberts. And, was it the other way around? So it was, the ordinance was? Okay, the ordinance was moved by Mr. Roberts and seconded by Mr. Cooper. And then Mr. Roberts has moved his proposed ordinance, which we will call proposed substitute, thank you, LR. And that was seconded by Mr. Lejewski. And so what we have in front of us is Mr. Roberts' proposed substitute. Mr. Robert, would you like to speak to your substitute again, or have you spoke well?
I'll speak to it a little.
Okay, thank you.
So, again, this is about trying to stop potential problems. So there's 2 categories, 2 reasons why having a more competitive process for the leasing would be a good thing. One that I addressed when I was talking about this was the fact that we're trying to make sure that if the next ordinance passes and we create this land sale process to people with those lease and mineral interests in nearby or the same properties, that we don't open up a situation for abuse where someone can lease a property, which is pretty cheap if it's just empty land, and then flip it to buy the land or even the land next door. And so, so that's one purpose. The other purpose is, which happened before some of the members were on the assembly a couple years ago, where we created the lease that was involved with all the mining claims, that created plenty of testimony that everyone here has heard. And that prompted us to pass an ordinance so that we would be informed of those mineral interests in the future. But that's based on the knowledge of the land management department. There may be some things they don't know about dealing with those properties. So by having this competitive leasing process and the notification process that goes with it and some public testimony, we might find out stuff about the property that affects our willingness to do the lease. And so having that competitive process and the appurtenances to it with the notification and the public hearing gives us more chance of learning about these problems while it's going on. So those are the 2 real reasons why a competitive leasing process would benefit us. Thank you.
Mr. Lawrence.
Question for the administration. in what way does a person leasing borough land give them an advantage or an inside track to purchase the land?
At this time, in terms of code, nothing, but if the next ordinance were to be approved, then someone leasing borough land has the ability to come to us and request a direct sale, and then that would be brought to the assembly as an ordinance for approval, instead of waiting for the land to end up on an auction sale at some point initiated by the borough.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Lawrence.
Well, I'm trying to figure out, I mean, I know that these two ordinances are somewhat related, the lease of borough land and the sale of borough land, but I'm not quite sure why this notification provision for people, to neighbors or adjoining property owners who, when there's a leasing situation, is necessary. I can understand why it has more necessity if there's a sale situation, but I'm not fully understanding why this notification process is important in a lease situation.
Okay, you want me to speak to that? So, the best example is the example that we all know too well from all the testimony we've had on it, where we didn't know about a situation, and somebody leased the property and created what seems to most people to be a potential land use conflict in the future. Now, what decision we would have made if we known that, no one knows. But by learning about that process, by learning about the issue, it might have affected that process. We might have made a different decision. And so we can't know everything out there, and there might be some situations that land management doesn't know about. They're required now to let us know about, those kind of mineral interests and other interests. But there's a lot of stuff they might not necessarily know about. We wrote the language so they wouldn't have to be omniscient. So, but there's a lot of people, the neighbors especially, who have a good chance of having special information about that property, and they could let us know. And so the problem is, once you go through with that lease, then you're in a situation, as we are in with that property that we've had discussions about before, where now they've put a lot of money into infrastructure, and they've got a going concern there, and we don't really want to do away with it. This assembly just voted to extend that lease for a considerable period of time. And that's going to be able to be converted to a sale. So we're looking at avoiding those kind of situations in the future that create land use conflicts and problems with economic development. Whether you see that particular situation as a problem, I'm sure you can think of situations where it might become a problem. And so that's what we're trying to do, is shed more light on the situation, get more knowledge, and maybe we'll make a little more money with a competitive bid process because somebody else will have a different idea and be willing to pay more for it.
Hey, Mr. Williams, did you have your hand up?
Right, so trying to get my head around this, it's kind of a chicken and the egg thing. So that land use conflict, going right back to the beginning of the genesis of that land use conflict, in the situation that we talked about a few months ago, what was preventing other people who could have had a conflict from coming to us in the beginning, or to begin with, and entering a lease with us to prevent that conflict?
I can answer that.
I'm trying to understand it.
So the way the process works currently is they come talk to the administration in some way, through land management directly. Probably if they went direct, they'd be sent back to land management. They would work out a lease agreement, and of course Sandra can weigh in on the specifics here, and then she presents it to the mayor, and you guys might bargain back and forth, and you reach an agreement on what the lease agreement is going to be. Then it's brought forward to the assembly in a resolution. So there's very little notice there. There's less notice. There's no public hearing. But nobody around that property is noticed in any way. So nobody knows this is going on unless they're paying attention to the Borough Assembly's agenda every week, because a resolution only takes 1 week to be in front of us.
Right, so I understand that process because we do it, and I agree that we probably want to have more transparency, so the ordinance process, having that one ordinance is probably the way to go, but I'm still hung up on why the other landowner who has a potential conflict couldn't start that process first. Just to lock it up.
Okay, so a lot of people, I mean, we have very few of these leases because there might be more, but most people don't realize they can even do a lease with the borough for borough land. That's not common knowledge, like a lot of our stuff isn't common knowledge. And so occasionally we'll get somebody, they'll get the idea, they'll find out they can, and they'll negotiate, and they'll try a lease and see if their idea works. I noticed it doesn't seem like the paintball company's on here anymore, so maybe that one didn't work out. I don't know if it is or not. But some work and some don't. But I really don't think it's common knowledge, and people aren't going to know that they could go do that. And they just think it's just a piece of land the borough owns. Well, that's great, so I don't have to worry about anyone developing that. And they just enjoy the fact that that property is just there.
So one of the things I'm concerned about, and the mayor, we have talked at length about this, is with the two ordinance process, getting that tied up for so long, that's going to really demotivate business owners, folks who want to put that land to use to develop, economy, some kind of work in the community. So we're interested in that. But again, it goes back to my first comment. It's like, what's preventing the other surrounding landowners from making the first move? That's not a comment.
Only knowledge and their motivation.
Other questions or discussion on this?
I guess I don't grasp the purpose for having a notice as well. Like, if you're just leasing the land to let people utilize it and have a purpose for it, it's not rezoning. We're not going to give somebody a lease that's incongruent with our zoning that is in the area, right? I mean, we're not going to permit that. It's not a rezone, so it doesn't need that same kind of DPO level. I'm at a loss as to why this one's needed, and given the fact that it's got a date that's after the 2017-71 afterward, makes me feel like it's trying to solve a problem that's not there.
Well, we had a problem. So, I mean, that's why all this came about and why we sent the next ordinance back to LMAC. And this was just one of the things they came up with, saying, hey, this might help with some of the issues that were raised. And so this is about trying to solve a particular problem. And it was, I guess you could say, it's the best thing we came up with, beyond the changes we make to the other ordinance that we'll see next.
Mr. Wojcicki.
I'll just say it makes perfect sense to me. Now we are, if we pass the ordinance after this ordinance, we're going to be giving the leaseholders a sort of, I guess someone's used the term already, inside track to purchasing it. So giving them scrutiny that's more akin to someone actually purchasing the lot becomes more appropriate when they gain that advantage. So anyway, it just makes total sense. I'll support the ordinance and the substitute to it.
Okay, we appear to be worn out and ready to vote or something. Mr. Lawrence.
Back to Ms. Molta. I want to make sure I understand the ramifications. The proposed substitute for Mr. Roberts is having, is stating that a lease must be initially, well, whether if there's a proposal to lease property, then the assembly has to consider that or has to approve that proposal through an ordinance. And if there's two people who want to lease the same piece of property, there has to be a competitive process. And then after that competitive process, there's another ordinance to approve whoever won the competitive process. First of all, Mr. Roberts, is that a fair summary of your substitute?
I didn't quite follow your entire chain there, so I'm sorry.
Give us a summary of it.
Okay, so there's a somebody comes to the mayor wanting to lease a property to the administration. Okay, the administration comes to the assembly and says, with an ordinance saying we want to lease this property. There's public hearing on it. There's notification sent out to 2 layers of property owners. They can come to the public hearing. They could even just send an email. If one of those DPO receivers says, hey, I'd also like to bid on that. I'd like this to be a competitive process. Then a competitive process is entered, assuming the assembly passes that ordinance. Then we enter a competitive process, and the administration works with those who want to bid, who are eligible to bid on it. And then they get proposals, they work out a deal, just like as they do now with the proposal they like the best, they fine-tune it, they bring forward a full lease proposal to the assembly, and then the assembly approves that, or not.
All right, then let's compare that process with the current process. The current process is that the assembly must authorize, through resolution instead of ordinance, but resolution has to authorize the whole concept of leasing land, of leasing a particular piece of borough land without any specific individual in mind, right? I mean, obviously, this gets, well, what's the current procedure? If somebody comes to the borough and says, hey, you guys have some land I'd like to lease.
So we would work with the party to determine exactly what they would be using it for, the specific area they want. We would coordinate through the departments internally to make sure that no other department had an issue with use of that land for that particular purpose. We would bring it to the administration and see if they're interested in proposing or sponsoring the resolution. If the administration is willing, then it would come to the assembly for a specific purpose to a specific entity to be leased as a resolution. If the assembly adopts it, then then land management begins the actual negotiation of the document, the appraisal of the property. So we try not to spend a whole lot of time or a whole lot of money on the effort until the assembly has actually guaranteed.
Okay, but once the assembly has approved, under current law, once the assembly has approved the overall concept of leasing the property to this entity or person, then we're done. Then the administration will negotiate the lease, and under current law, it need not come back to the assembly?
That's correct.
All right, so that's the difference here. I mean, other than just being an ordinance, is that in this substitute, it's coming back to the assembly a second time for final approval of the details of the final lease. And this substitute is also saying that if more than one person is interested in that property, there has to be a competitive bidding process instead of maybe.
As I understand it, that's the difference. There's an initial ordinance, then there's a notification. If there's interest, there's bidding, and then regardless of whether there's bidding and interest or not, it still has to come back to the assembly for a second ordinance.
So that in the work session, administration expressed the concern that this is adding a tremendous amount of time. Under current law, how long does it take, this process?
No trouble sort of scenario, 3 months, about 100 days.
All right. So I'm trying to figure out what's adding the time.
The fact that it's 3 public meetings, well, the initial introduction of the ordinance, the work session, and then the hearing times two, plus a good 60 days for putting out the proposal. And we haven't really discussed whether this would be an invitation for bids or whether it would be a request for proposals, which are 2 different kinds of processes. And we haven't really discussed what kind of evaluation factors we would do, because we could have one party that's interested in doing a daycare and another party that's interested in doing a garden or a chicken selling farm. So how would we take those 2 leases? What evaluation factors for such different uses? How would we do that? We haven't really discussed that.
Yeah, no, a major concern I have for this substitute is the requirement that there be a bidding process if more than one person's interested, because, I don't know how that's going to work. How often, since you've been at the borough, how many times has there been a competitive process over leasing borough property?
So it is in code, and I think it's envisioned to be similar to what the university does, which is they select a property up front and say, okay, we want a commercial use on this property, and then they put out a request for proposals. I think that's how, we've never tested it. The answer to your question, sir, is we have never, as far as back as the 80s, I have not been able to find a single competitive lease on our files. And honestly, as you've seen on those lists, the bulk of our leases to date have been community type, less than fair market value. Only in these recent years have we sort of started pushing towards making use of our land in a way that would generate revenue through fair market rental value leases. And in fact, one of the 2 that we got because they were dealing with the state and it was taking too long, so they decided they couldn't wait to put their business plan in action and came to us.
All right. Okay, you can come back.
Thank you, yeah. Mr. Roberts, I need to go to Mr. Cooper for a motion. Do you need to speak first?
Yeah, I'd just like to reply to one line in that. So there's a line on line 51. If a competitive process is not required, assembly approval may be granted in the ordinance authorizing borough land to be leased.
All right.
So if it doesn't need to be competitive, it can be approved in the first one, though I do realize, and thought of this before, that they will have to come in with a certain amount of detail for the assembly to be able to make a responsible decision in that ordinance. So.
Mr. Cooper.
I guess I just want to take a procedural break for a moment and a question for the clerk. Perhaps the clerk can help me in formulating the proper motion here. In order to continue with some agenda items, but then preserve our ability to adjourn to a time certain, could you describe the process for that?
Since your rules require you guys to adjourn at 11:30 tonight, you would need to suspend your rules to complete the agenda, which would need to be passed with a 2/3 vote, which is 6 people. And then sometime after that motion, you can go ahead and entertain a motion to adjourn to a fixed time or a certain time at another day and time.
Thank you. So I'm going to move to suspend the rules to complete the agenda. Second.
So moved by Mr. Cooper and seconded by Mr. Tackey to suspend the rules, which I believe is non-debatable. That's correct. So I think that we've had a little description already, so clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Roberts.
Yes.
Mr. Tackey.
Yes.
Mr. Gray.
Yes.
Mr. Quist.
Yes.
Mr. Wojcicki.
Yes.
Mr. Cooper.
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence.
Yes.
Ms. Dodge.
Yes. Would anyone like to change their vote? Seeing none?
8-0.
Thank you. The rules are suspended. Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Back to Mr. Roberts, I believe you were.
No, I said my
completed
piece.
Thank you. Any last discussion or debate on the proposed substitute known as substitute Lance Roberts? Seeing none? Yes, Mr. Lawrence.
Back to the administration. I've got this ordinance is proposed substitute is requiring a bidding process if more than one party is interested in the same property. You've mentioned already the scenario where two parties can be interested in the same property for different uses, and it's hard. Then, if it's competitive, I guess who's willing to pay the most, I guess, in rent. But what other issues do you have, or concerns or problems does the administration have with this new provision that rather than the borough may provide for a competitive process, it's required to do so? Do you see any big issues with that?
Other than pinning down evaluation criteria, how we would evaluate these two, other than money, because as written, the ordinance sort of indicates that it could be invitation for bid, but it could also be request for proposal, which is why I believe line 51 says bidder or proposer. That was the intent, to follow Title 16, so that it would be invitation for bid or request for proposal. Invitation for bid in Title 16 actually says we take the lowest bid because it's made for procurement, not for this kind of scenario. So I'm guessing we would circumvent that and understand it to mean that we want more money than less. But in terms of a request for proposal, I'm still not sure how staff would evaluate two potentially very different uses in a bid process. We would also be concerned that someone, if there weren't some mechanism to put some skin in the game, that someone could disingenuously come into the chambers or say, I'm interested, when they're not really interested, just to slow whoever is truly interested enough to walk away.
I guess one concern I have is, under current code, the administration is in a position, if there's two different entities looking at the same property, basically recommending to the assembly, or proposing to the assembly, one over the other without having to justify why. Is that fair?
At my level of the administration, I would actually push to have both ordinances come to you. It's my understanding that it's never really been our intention to discourage anyone from coming directly to the assembly, so long as there isn't a zoning issue or some other issue that would preclude them from proceeding with the lease.
Williams, did you want to say something?
The mayor and I would send both up to the assembly. I can't speak for future administration, but we would do that.
With regards to the notice requirement under this proposed substitute, what's the administration's position on that? Current code doesn't require notice to adjoining landowners. The substitute would. Do you have any concerns about that?
I think it's fair to give adjoining landowners notice that there's going to be some extra use. I think where we have some concerns is the timelines with the multiple ordinances that need to be introduced and worked through in that process.
And I had seen Ms. Dolan shaking her head when we were talking about that earlier, that there may in fact not be the need for two ordinances if there was no interest, that the initial ordinance proposing a lease agreement would be enough.
Correct. I think Mr. Roberts made that clarification already, but yeah, the substitute removed that requirement if there's not more than one person interested.
Well, from my perspective, I'm trying to find reasons to vote for Mr. Tackey's and my substitute over Mr. Roberts, and I'm not getting much help here. So, yeah, I'm good for now.
Okay, Mr. Roberts would like to speak.
I just wanted to point out that the only people who could force a competitive bid are those who actually got a notice. So it's not just anybody in the borough. They can come testify on the ordinance. But the process only starts when one of the notifies, I don't know what you call them, the people who are notified actually say that they want a competitive process.
Yes, Mr. Tackey.
That actually provides me with another hiccup. Then I figured you'd allow anybody to be able to have a stake at being able to actually have an interest in this lease. So if it does get noticed or there's an ordinance out there, then they can come and speak up and weigh in on that bidding process. As the way it's currently written in the code is that there may be competitive bidding to lease borough land without any specificity of how close you are to the proximity of that property.
Right. So we wanted to prevent abuse. I mean, I didn't want to go to the entire borough and have one cantankerous individual who just decides he's going to say, I want to bid on every single lease that comes up. So I put it to the area of those adjoining in the next level to keep down on the number of people who could force the competitive process. Because if you open it up that wide, then I certainly agree that it's going to get abused. But if you keep it small, then you're lowering the chances. I mean, not that I think this is a process that's going to happen all that often, but I want to make sure that it's not going to be abused to that level.
Mr. Lawrence.
Well, from my perspective, it's the neighbor who may have more motivation just to try to stop anything from happening. And so I kind of share Mr. Tackey's concern is, since this is borough land that we all have a stake in, I'm not So what this ordinance, or this substitute is saying is that if somebody comes up with a proposal to use some land, only the neighbors can bid against that proposal. And I've got some concern about that. The fact of the matter is, though, is that this competitive bidding over leased land in the borough doesn't happen very much at all. So that's a problem. And it's not this may be more of a theoretical concern than a real concern in most cases. But as Mr. Roberts pointed out, is if there's no competitor seeking to use that property, then it's going to go pretty much the way it's been going, except it's an ordinance instead of a resolution. That'll slow it down. And there's some notice requirements. It's probably going to slow things down some. But in most cases, there's not going to be a second ordinance. So I guess what this body needs to consider is, do we want to limit the right of people to bid just to the neighborhood? Not sure of that.
Any other, Mr. Roberts?
I'll just point out, just as you're thinking about that issue, that you're going to come up with the same issue in the next ordinance where you have a limited pool of bidders for the property, which is the entire purpose for this ordinance, is because of that limited pool of bidders. I'm trying to mitigate against the possibility of abuse.
I think people are thinking they may not have their hands up, but I think that they have hands that are hovering. So I'm giving them a little slack for tired brains and hovering hands. Are we ready to vote? Yes, Mr. Tackey.
I'm going to move to amend the ordinance. So on line 43, cross delete and in properties adjoining those adjoining properties.
I'm sorry, 43?
43 on 44.
And can you repeat that again?
Yeah, strike and in properties adjoining those adjoining properties.
Is there a second?
Second.
So Mr. Tackey has moved to amend the substitute to delete on line 43 and in properties adjoining those adjoining properties. It's been seconded by Mr. Quist. Now it would read, those with a known land interest in adjoining properties shall be notified of the proposed lease claims and interests. Would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, I'm just go back to what LMAC actually suggested, just notifying adjoining land properties, and I don't think it's necessary that you need to go out 2 layers deep because you're not actually an adjoining property anymore. You're not going to be as impacted.
Mr. Roberts, would you like to speak
So
to
that's
that?
certainly something that's amendable that the Assembly can choose, is how far to notify. I tried to pick something that was reasonable based on the fact that most of these sales are farther out with larger land chunks, and I wanted to make sure that we had a large enough group to get us the kind of information and the kind of process we're looking for. But it's up to the Assembly which way they want to go with that.
Okay. Any other discussion on the proposed amendment to the substitute? Seeing none, is there objection to the proposed amendment? Yes, Mr. Quist objects, so clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Cooper?
Yes.
Mr. Quist?
No.
Mr. Wojciechowski?
Yes.
Mr. Tackey?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Gray?
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence?
Yes.
Ms. Dodge?
Yes. Would anyone like to change a vote? Seeing none?
7-1.
It's adopted 7-1. We are back to the substitute as amended. Oh, look, very busy. Do you want to vote or do you want to think more?
Vote.
I hear one vote for vote.
Will it carry the main motion?
That had been my intention, but no, I think probably it shouldn't, should it? Okay.
Probably not.
Yep, thank you for clarifying that.
You say,
So I said it won't carry the main motion.
as far, you mean the substitute?
So it won't carry the main motion.
That leaves your substitute.
Available.
But if Mr. Roberts' substitute passes,
We'll have to vote again.
we'll have to vote again. But what if, how do,
Well, you
they're
could
not
then-
they're inconsistent ordinances.
Right, you could then move a substitute, I
Move a
believe.
substitute and try to get the Assembly to overrule what it just did.
Or if this fails, you can move your substitute and
That's what
still
I'm
have that
saying.
option, yeah.
That's easy
Right,
enough.
right, that's,
Okay.
Call the previous question.
Well, I guess that's a
I think that the previous question was me asking if we wanted to vote.
I thought, what's the correct way to move that? We vote. Non-debatable, that motion. On the
I'm ready,
not carrying
if we're
it.
ready to vote, let's vote. I'm not used to just watching everybody sit and think.
We're voting on the substitute as amended, and it does not carry the main motion. Is
That's
that correct, Madam Chair? Okay. Mr. Tackey?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Wojciechowski?
Yes.
Mr. Cooper?
Yes.
Mr. Quist?
Yes.
Mr. Gray?
No.
Mr. Lawrence?
Yeah, yes.
Ms. Dodge?
Yes, would anyone like to change their vote? Seeing none?
7-1.
7-1. So we have the proposed substitute. The ordinance has been amended.
So it's been substituted? Right. That's what you have before you.
So we have the substitute before
as
us,
amended.
as amended.
That's the main motion.
So I'm going to wait a moment. If no one moves a substitute, I'm going to move the motion as amended, or as substituted.
Substitute. So you want
You don't have to move anything. It's the motion's on the table.
On the table. The main motion is
Are you trying to move the substitute Van Lawrence and Sean Tuckey, or are you trying to move? You were just wanting
I
us
was
to vote.
confused. I
So, I'll move the Tackey Lawrence substitute for the sake of discussion if Mr. Lawrence wants to discuss it and there's a second.
Second.
So it's been moved by Mr. Cooper and seconded by Mr. Tackey to consider the proposed substitute Van Lawrence and Sean Tuckey. Lack of a version 2.
And as the maker of the motion, I'd like to hear Mr. Lawrence and Mr. Tackey's thoughts here because they're not sure where they're at with this, with their thought process on their substitute.
Frankly, other than Mr. Roberts, I don't know if any of us are sure where we're at. But my initial,
We're in the Mona Lisa Drexel chambers.
yeah, my initial thought in
Confused.
making this substitute, in proposing my substitute, and Mr. Tackey, I think, would agree, is is that the system or the process for leasing borough land didn't really need to be changed all that much, except to try to provide additional notice to the public about these lease transactions by converting, by changing it from a resolution to an ordinance, which is, one of the goals of Mr. Roberts' substitute and his original ordinance. But to tell the truth, I mean, this is going to extend the timeline of these leases. But if there's no competition involved, I think it's going to extend it by an acceptable amount of time. And if there are, competing interests or multiple parties interested in a particular piece of borough land, I think maybe the community is better off if we consider those competing interests. I mean, it's going to take longer, but that's why I voted for Mr. Roberts' substitute as amended.
And I guess for my thoughts on this ordinance. So yeah, the process was already functional for the most part. I wanted to increase the public, give everyone public say, public hearing by having it as an ordinance rather than as a resolution. And by doing that, you would open it up. So I do like things about Mr. Roberts' substitute, the fact that there's a bidding process, not a really bidding process, a proposing process rather than a bidding process. So it's not just based on dollars. So you don't have somebody that owns a mine that just is takes everybody out, and it's real simple. So I like the fact that I like that aspect of his ordinance over the way it's drafted now, where we may provide for a competitive bid, and it's stated as competitive bid right now. So the one that we would have would be just dollars. But it does open it up to other people. So now someone that actually would have, get the public notice, realize, oh, that land's available for a lease, see that it's there on the docket, and oh wait, I've got a much better idea of what's actually out there and available for public land. We could do something like this. But now it's narrowed down to only the folks that are right next door to that land already. And that part I have a little heartburn over. So that's why I'm sitting here rubbing my head, because I have to do massive amendments to our substitute to be able to pull off that same bidding process.
Or fail it.
Proposal process, yeah, exactly. Or kill the thing and have it redone.
Mr. Quist?
So I have a question for Mr. Tacky in regard to the last comment. You have an issue with the fact that we've now limited it to just the immediately surrounding properties. That was an amendment that you just made a few minutes ago. I think I might have been the only one that opposed it. And how do you square those two things? 'Cause I'm really confused now.
Or who needs to have a dear property owner notice. That's my purpose. I don't think everyone in the surrounding area needs to be sent a letter saying, hey, we're going to be leasing this. Do you want to take a stab at it? But having a public notice as in, hey, it's on our agenda. It's out there that we're leasing this. The entire community then would have a stake and a chance.
Okay, if I could follow up. Then the entire community could potentially enter the competitive bidding process if they chose to?
Right, as it is now.
Well, no, I don't think so. I think Mr. Roberts' substitute that we unfortunately that we just adopted only allows the competitive process, is only open to the neighbors.
That's what any ordinances are set up.
Ms. Dolan?
Yeah, sorry, no, we need to clarify that. So Mr. Roberts' substitute only requires a competitive process if it's someone in the notification area that triggers it. But once you're in the process, anyone can compete.
Okay.
Yeah, then it's not restricted.
Mr. Roberts, you're next.
Yeah.
That was a great point that I'd completely forgot about and hadn't thought of, so thank you, Attorney, for bringing that up. I was just going to say that what you're talking about with making complicated amendments, it might be easier to just come up with another ordinance changing this so you can really think through exactly how you want this process to work. But I think the point she made really answers it well.
It did solidify it. We're comfortable with it. Right.
Okay. So are we ready to vote then on the version 2 substitute number 2? Okay, clerk, please call the roll.
Are you ruling this does not carry the main motion?
Does not carry the main motion.
Mr. Lejewski?
No.
Mr. Roberts?
No.
Mr. Gray? No. Mr. Tacky?
No.
Mr. Quist?
No.
Mr. Cooper?
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence?
No.
Ms. Dodge?
No. Would anyone like to change their vote? Seeing none?
1-7.
It's fails 1-7. We're back to the proposed substitute version 1. Any further discussion on proposed substitute version 1? Are we ready to vote, it appears, on the ordinance as amended? And it certainly carries the main motion. It is the main motion.
What's the main motion? As substituted and
As
amended?
substituted and amended. And massaged.
Are you ready?
Yes.
Mr. Lejewski?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Gray?
No.
Mr. Tacky?
Yes.
Mr. Quist?
Yes.
Mr. Cooper?
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence?
Yes.
Ms. Dodge?
Yes. Would anyone like to change their vote? Seeing none?
7-1.
It's adopted 7-1. That takes us to